On in, I'd appreciate it.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Board of Retirement meeting. Today is Wednesday, January 3rd, 2024, and the time is 9:09 a.m. Let's go ahead and do our and before we begin with the staff announcements, I'd like to welcome Nancy Durazo. Welcome to the board. And then we also have David Rue, who is on his way in right now.
And Wayne Moore.
And also, of course, Wayne Moore. So you're such a staple. I'm just used to you being here. Let's go ahead and proceed with the staff announcements.
Thank you, Chair Kehoe. This meeting is being held virtually and in person, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Trustee Nancy Durazo.
Present.
Vivian Gray.
Present.
Jason Green.
Present.
Mr. J.P. Harris.
Here.
Keith Knox.
Good morning, I'm here.
Wayne Moore. Ronald Oakham.
Here.
Les Robbins.
Present.
Antonio Sanchez.
Here.
Trustee David Rue is on his way, and Chair Kehoe.
Present.
Staff participating in the meeting include CEO Santos Kryman, Deputy CEO Louis Lugo, Assistant Executive Officers JJ Popowich and Laura Guglielmo, Chief Audit Executive Richard Bendel, CIO John Grable, Chief Counsel Stephen Rice, Senior Staff Counsels Frank Boyd and Jasmine Bath, Legislative Affairs Officer Barry Liu. Staff and managers participating today include Tatiana Bayer, Kathy Delino, Chat Arande, Cassandra Smith, Louis Gittins, Vincent Lim, Allison Barrett, Tamara Caldwell, Vicky Nilly, Carrie Wilson, Hernan Barrientos, and Ricardo Salinas. LACERA's medical advisor, Dr. Glenn Arisman, will also be joining today's meeting. Milliman Consultant Actuaries, Janet Jennings and Robert Schmidt, and Rebecca Walker from Kaplan and Walker. Trustees, please use the raise your hand Zoom option to be placed in the queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until you are ready to speak, and now we may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you. Next item is our Pledge of Allegiance. Antonio, can you please lead us? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. That now brings us to our ratification of officers. The first is a recommendation from our CEO that the board ratify its slate of officers for the 2024 calendar year. That would be myself as chair, Les Robbins as vice chair, and Mr. Oakham as secretary. We have a memo dated December 17th of 23. I don't need a motion.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Please vote.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Sanchez? Aye. Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Durazo?
Aye.
And Wayne Moore.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously with all trustees present.
Thank you. The next item is our election of our committee members for the 2024 season. And the first will be the election for the Joint Organizational Governance Committee. And we will open this up for nominations. Do I hear a nomination? I will nominate Ms. Gray. Any additional nominations? Hearing none, I make a motion to close the nominations.
Aye, second.
It's moved and second. Do we vote on
No votes,
this?
yes.
No votes, since there's only one nomination. Congratulations, Ms. Gray, for being the Jog C. And our next item is the Audit Committee. Our Audit Committee, we have 3 positions available. So we will open up nominations for the Audit Committee. And I would like to hear nominations. I'll nominate Keith Knox.
I am already on the audit committee by virtue of my title.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So
I appreciate it, though.
Mr.
Yeah.
Moore.
Do I
How
get two
about
votes?
Mr. Wayne Moore for nomination? Okay, I have Ms. Gray. Any other nominations? We have a third seat open.
I'll nominate Mr. Razzo.
Okay. There we go. We have our three nominations. We are still open for nominations if we want to have a runoff. I hear none, so I'll take a motion to close nominations.
So moved. Second.
It's moved and seconded. So since we only have three nominations in three positions, we will call this so ordered. That was nice and smooth. I think I messed it up because I had a whole script I was supposed to follow, but I think I saved us 5 minutes. So let's move on to item 5, which is our procedure for teleconference committee meeting. We have no requests. Actually, we do. We have Mr. Robbins. My apologies. So we don't need to vote on it. We just need to do an announcement.
Correct. And confirm that there's no individuals over the age of 18.
Okay, perfect. Mr. Robbins, is there any individuals present over the age of 18?
Nope.
Okay, then we'll consider the online meeting approved, and we'll move on to our approval of the minutes of the December 6th, 2023 board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, let's please vote.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Sanchez?
Aye.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Durazo? Aye. Mr. Moore?
I abstain.
She should abstain.
Okay, the motion passes with 8 yeses and 1 abstention.
Perfect, thank you. We'll consider the minutes approved. Moving on to our public comment. We do have one request from the public to speak. So I would like to call Mr. Carlton Chambers.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to be here. I flew in today from Seattle, Washington to speak. The last time you spoke about me, there seemed to be tremendous questions about me, my past injuries that I've had. Well, after 33 years with the county, ending up in county jail, I've had every injury there is. My left knee is now titanium, and I've hurt my shoulder and everything else I could. I've done a lot for Kaiser Permanente. They worked on me every which way. So I want to come in and clarify any questions you may have when the time comes. I believe when you talked about me last, someone suggested I might be trying to commit a fraud. Very insulting. So I really would like to answer any questions you have at a later date whenever you talk about my case specifically. So again, I left the rain in Seattle to come here to this rain, so it really doesn't matter, but I'm glad to be here and answer any questions you may have. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Your item will be heard in a closed session. And during the public comment process, we don't have questions or answers, so you just have a statement to provide. Okay, we now move on to, or let me ask any additional requests for public to speak.
Yeah.
Do we receive any? Okay, perfect. We will move on to item 8, which is our executive update, and item 8, which is our LACERA All-Stars.
So thank you, Chair, and good morning, happy New Year to all our trustees. Our all-stars are staff members who we recognize, who have gone above and beyond, helping each other and deliver great member experience to our members, or to help their fellow staff members. So please join me in congratulating Paola Johns, Vicky Chu, Savag Antabian, and Edward Wong. And then our web watcher was Ted Granger. So thank you very much for all that you guys do.
Congratulations.
And that brings us to our member spotlight. So please join me in taking a moment to recognize and celebrate the members selected for this month's member spotlight. Our spotlight program is about recognizing the hardworking members who serve the constituents of LA County and to celebrate their contributions to the community and provide us a moment to reflect on why we do what we do, which is to serve the member. So this month, our spotlight shines on Gloria D'Orazzi. She is a traffic, or was a traffic secretary, she's retired, and put in her 25 years of service, which she was quite proud of, and she should be. Mr. Ozzie is going to be spending a quiet, nice, enjoyable, relaxing retirement with her family. And so we recognize everything that she's done for the county. After 25 years, that's a long time, and we appreciate her service. So thank you very much.
Thank you, JJ. That brings us on to our CEO's report.
Yes, Chair Kehoe, just wanted to welcome everybody back. Looking forward to a very productive 2024. Wanted to welcome Mr. Razzo and Mr. Moore, welcome you back. And Mr. Rue, I'm glad you're able to join us not only on the Board of Investments, but the Board of Retirement as well. I also want to express our gratitude to you, Mr. Kehoe, for your past chairmanship, and we're looking forward to working with you, Mr. Robbins and Mr. Oakham, as we move forward as part of the leadership team of the Board of Retirement. So all of the staff are excited for this particular year. There's a lot to be done. I have a very brief report for you. In terms of the strategic plan, we are continuing to meet on an ongoing basis to develop the action plans. We do intend on providing regular updates at the OOC meetings. And in terms of our progress, and our first report will be in April. We're going to do it on a quarterly basis. So in terms of the Board of Retirement offsite, we are still in the process of trying to locate a suitable hotel. We thought we had one lined up, but things happened. So we're still shooting for the end of February for that particular meeting, and we'll keep you up to speed. And I know that I will be scheduling a meeting with Chair Kehoe and Mr. Robbins to talk about the agenda for that particular meeting, as well as the venue. I also wanted to provide just a very brief update on some key recruitments. I know that in the past we were talking about trying to hire attorneys, both on the investment side and on the benefits side. I know that that the senior counsel position job bulletin is closing. I think it actually closed yesterday, but
It did.
maybe it closed yesterday, right? And so we have a number of candidates that are still being vetted, and we'll be making a selection very, very soon in terms of assisting with the investment team transactions, as well as rounding out the legal services that are needed on the benefits side. So those have been some pretty difficult recruitments, just because of, a whole bunch of different dynamics, including, compensation and so on and so forth. And so we're working through all of those issues. The Chief Financial Officer position job bulletin has closed, and so we intend on making a selection very, very soon. Hopefully that we'll be able to bring that individual on board by February. And so I don't have a lot of other information to provide, and so I'd be more than happy to stand for questions.
Yeah. Any questions from any board members? Seeing none, thank you very much for the detailed report. We are now moving on to our disability retirement applications on the consent calendar. And we will hear pages 1 through 3 of our safety SEDs, application 244E through 278E. And I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Let's please vote.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray? Aye. Mr. Sanchez?
Aye.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Ryu? Ms. Durazo?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Chair Kehoe?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously with all trustees present.
Thank you. This brings us to page 4 of our consent calendar for safety SEDs for fire and lifeguards. Application 1767B through 1779B.
I'll move. to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Let's please vote.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Sanchez?
Aye.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Aye.
Mr. Razzo?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
Thank you. That brings us to page 6 and 7, our general member SEDs. Those are application 2682C through 2694C. I'll need a motion.
So moved. Second.
So moved and seconded. Let's please vote.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Sanchez?
Aye.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Aye.
Mr. Razzo?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
Thank you. That brings us to our final page, page 8, our general NSCDs. We do have one application. It's 4501.
I'll move it. Second.
Moved and seconded. Let's please vote.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Sanchez?
Aye.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Aye.
Mr. Razzo?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
The motion passes by all trustees present.
Okay, thank you. That moves us along to our consent calendar. We have items A through H. Does any trustee wish to poll or discuss any of these items? I see none, so let's go ahead and accept a motion for adopting consent items A through H.
I'll move approval.
Need a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Let's please vote.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Sanchez? Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Aye.
Mr. Razzo?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
Thank you. That moves us to our excluded from consent, which we had none, so we'll move along to our non-consent item. We do have an item A, which is a recommendation that the board approves the amendment of the current master plan contract with the WBCP Inc. For professional recruiting services for 23-24. We had previously approved it for $150,000, so we'd like to move it to $300,000 and delegate authority to pay all related invoices. Any requests for staff presentation, or can we move forward with? Okay, we do have a verbal update. Laura, please.
Good morning. I'm Laura Guglielmo, the Assistant Executive Officer responsible for the Business Services Group, and I am filling in for Dr. Carly Antoya, our Human Resources Director, who is enjoying time with her family today. There is one technical update that a correction we'd like to make to the written report. We indicated that the number of IT specialists ones that we would be filling would be a total of 10. In fact, it's 8. 6 of them are in the systems division. 2 are for our information security office, and they accidentally or inadvertently combined that total of 8 for just the systems division. So it's 6 for systems, 2 for information security, and the number of information specialists 2 are correct in the memo. So it's a total of 14 positions, not 16.
Thank you. I have Mr. Green.
Thank you. I'm active recruitment. I mean, I fully am aware, of our burden with trying to fill positions and what that does to the rest of the staff and everything. And it's just a significant increase in funding, double the amount. And I guess it's just for a point of information.
47. There you go.
I mean, if you could speak to just the cost in doubling it from 150 to 300, because it seems like there was a little bit left with the positions. There was a little bit left in the coffers, so to speak, that we had some left over. Is that part of that 300,000? Is that the rollover from that?
Just to clarify, so historically, LACERA has not used outside recruiting firms to help us with positions at this level. However, they're very technical positions. And we had really great success with WBCP. They helped us with the recruitment for the information manager positions recently, which are also very technical. And we had an outstanding candidate pool from which to choose from. So we found that they were they had particularly good context in order to attract the best quality candidates, which is part of the reason we felt it was going to be beneficial for us to use their services. The increase in cost, it's really just the contract authority up to $300,000. We will be and have negotiated very good rates with them in terms of keeping the costs low. Typically, recruitments that are done by outside range higher than what the per recruitment is. With this one, we were able to kind of negotiate a volume discount, so to speak, because the amount of work is reduced by having a number of positions to fill. We don't anticipate using the entire $300,000. It's just to give us that authority. And also I wanted to be clear that we're not asking for an increase in appropriation. So the budget for the organization would not increase. It would just be the funds allocated for this particular project.
So that 89 technically will be spent before it gets into the new fiscal.
Correct.
Ask, basically.
Right. There's no new fiscal
Yeah,
ask
okay.
either this year or for the current year at all. We would
Gotcha.
just
And
be
you
absorbing the
answered my
cost.
second question, which was, obviously the need, for the nuance of the position and whatnot, but also, ideally, recruitment should, handle in-house, but there's a definite need for this. Okay. Thank you for the clarification on that.
I just have one quick question. So you're not giving them 300, you're paying a percentage of who you hire?
That's
Up-
correct.
Up to 300?
The contract itself, we're asking for the contract authority to be authorized up to $300,000. The actual recruitments, I think on this, usually it's a percentage of salary. I think in this particular case, it's negotiated on a per assignment. I think it's for the one level, I believe.
And
it's
what is that percentage?
Well, the percentage can be up to a third of the salary, but in this case, I think it's a flat fee of $15,000. If I haven't been involved in the specific negotiations, but it looks to be that
So
the calculation.
if you hire 10 people, what do you think the average is? 20,000 per?
Well, we had for this particular engagement,
Yeah.
because we were anticipating higher, 10 people were $150,000. So that would be about 15,000 per employee, which is less than the going rate generally.
I agree.
I move
Additional
to
question?
adopt.
I'll second it.
We have a motion to accept staff recommendations, and it's been seconded. So let's please vote.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Ms. Gray? Mr. Sanchez? Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Mr. Robbins?
No.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Razzo?
Aye.
Mr. Moore? Yes. The motion passes with 8 yeses and 1 no.
Thank you. We now move on to our reports. Our first report is going to be our 23 Triennial Actuarial Update for OPEB. So let's let our actuaries get set up. I have to slow down. Maybe try to get out of here before lunch.
Oh, yeah. I saw that too.
Good morning, trustees and Chair Kehoe. I'm Laura Guglielmo with the Business Services Group, and I'm sitting in for Ted Granger, our interim CFO, who is also out this week enjoying time with his family. With us today are our consultants from Milliman, our actuarial consultants, Robert Schmidt and Janet Jennings, and they are going to make a presentation for you today about our OPEB program or other post-employment benefit program. So Robert and
Okay.
Janet.
Thank you, Laura. It's good to be here today. We're at the beginning of our cycle of experience study and valuation for July 1 of 2023. And we wanted to just spend a little time getting the board members familiar with the process and answering any questions before we move into our process. And we'll have some presentations coming down the road in the next several months. So I wanted to just get you a level set before we move into that. So on the next slide, I would like to just talk about our overall agenda. We'll talk about the scope of our projects this year, our timeline. There'll be a summary of the process, which includes data, our experience study, the economic assumption study, and then there's some discussion items we have at the end of things we wanted to talk to you about as well. And my colleague Janet will get started on the next slide in some of the details.
Thank you and good morning. On the next slide, I'll go through the scope. This is sometimes known as the trifecta year, in that we conduct an OPEB experience study, an OPEB valuation, and both of those have an actuarial review by Kavanaugh McDonald. So the OPEB experience study includes the OPEB specific economic and demographic assumptions. And on the funding valuation, Kavanaugh McDonald will do an actuarial review on a replication basis, in that they will do an independent valuation and then we compare results. On the next slide, we'll talk about the timeline. So we have begun receiving data from August through November. In November, we had an entrance meeting with all the stakeholders. We have been working on the census processing and the experience study, which brings us to the green meeting, where we are here to level set everyone on the OPEB projects. We'll have another stakeholders meeting in February to review our assumptions so that all the representatives feel comfortable with the assumptions we plan to use in the valuation.
Can you define the stakeholders for everyone?
I will. It's on the next slide, but I can certainly jump to that slide if you prefer, Mr. Kehoe.
Oh, no, well, if you're going to cover it.
Okay. Okay. Moving to the next line, we'll meet with you again. If you go back one slide, please. Thank you. We'll be meeting again in April with the Board of Retirement to discuss the investigation of experience study for OPEB. Now, back in March, we will receive the July 1, 2024 premiums that Siegel will be developing. And then we start to conduct the funding valuation. And I'll explain in the next slide why we wait for the July 1, 2024 premiums. Then in June, we'll meet again with the stakeholders meeting. And then in August of 2024, we'll meet again here to show the results of the valuation. Okay, now I'm ready for the next slide. Thank you. This slide shows the kind of from a year-to-year basis, all the work we do with OPEB. So our last OPEB experience study was in 2020. In 2021, we just had a funding valuation. Now in 2022, that's when the pension retirement experience study was conducted, and we included those retirement assumptions in our July 2022 valuation. So that included things like the inflation assumption, salary scale, likelihood of withdrawal, disability, mortality, and retirement. Now we're here in July 2023, where we are conducting the OPEB specific experience study, which you can see is conducted on a 3-year cycle, and we'll also conduct our funding valuation. On the next slide, Mr. Kehoe, this is where we depict all the stakeholders that are involved. You can see it's a healthy list. We include folks from all the agents, including LA County, Superior Court, and LACERA, and those agents pre-fund into the OPEB trust. There are 4 outside districts Little Lake Cemetery, LAFCO, LACO, and SCAQMD, who do not pre-fund through the outside trust, but we do include them in the funding valuation. On the union side, in the green box, there's inclusion from SEIU, Local 1014, and CCU, Coalition of County Unions. We also include the consultant Siegel. And then on the actuary side, we have Kavanaugh McDonald as a reviewing actuary, Chiron, who is the actuary for LA County, Raylan Letson is the actuary for SEIU, and then Milliman as the actuary for LACERA. Okay. On the
Are there
next,
any questions at all on the stakeholder group?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mr. Moore?
The outside districts, you said the outside districts were included in the funding valuation, but they were not participating in pre-funding. So what does that mean?
oh, we just add them in as kind of a side result to display the liabilities for those 4 outside districts, but the actually determined contribution for them is not considered for pre-funding.
So it's just an information item.
That's right, it's informational.
Yeah, and Trustee Moore, I believe they also use it for their, potentially for some of their internal financial reporting. They just have not chosen to put more money into the OPEB trust that was established. They just pay the benefits as they go. They haven't put more money in like the county, the Superior Court and LACERA has chosen to do.
They get charged for that work?
They do get charged, I believe, through the administrative fee that is a part of the pay-as-you-go premium cost. Yeah.
Who's responsible for that? If they don't pre-fund, who's responsible? Is that a county agency? Is the county responsible for
The
those
special
4
district.
districts?
It's the special district would be responsible. They would just pay the benefits as they come due rather than putting money aside ahead of time in a trust like LACERA, the county, and the Superior Court do. So they're still paying the benefits. They're just not accumulating the funds in advance.
What happens if they can't afford to pay the benefits?
Well, then
They're a special district, they could technically declare bankruptcy.
I guess they could, yeah. Yeah,
Okay. Okay, thank you.
but we hope that never happens, of course.
I got a reaction that was kind of interesting from these 2.
Well, I just I don't think about that question every day.
I'm going back to my USC MPA roots here, talking about governance structure.
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind is these outside districts are very small, and so as a proportion of the total liability, it's not that large, so.
I think it's less than 2%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds about right.
In the aggregate or individual?
I would say in the aggregate, if you add them all together, it's
Very small.
may even be less than 1%.
Yeah.
I have a question.
That's great.
Just for edification, because we have new trustees, old trustees, and people like me who don't remember. Can you delineate the outside districts? Isn't there a little cemetery and can you?
Yeah, just repeat them
Sure.
more slowly.
So there's Little Lake Cemetery District, there's LAFCO, and then there's also LACO, and then SCAQMD.
So the Air Quality Management District, what's LAFCO and LACO?
Los Angeles,
Just agency formation commission or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the LA County Office of Education, are they LACERA members?
Yeah, their employees.
I believe they are.
Their employees are.
Yeah,
Their legacy, I mean, they're not currently LACERA members. There's a segment of, if I think I'm right. There's a segment that were LACERA members, but that happened decades ago. And then they switched over to, I think, PERS, if I remember correctly.
And
PERS.
some of those districts still remain, right?
Correct.
Not all of them switched over to.
Correct.
And maybe it'd be good just as a side note, maybe have a short write-up and give it to the board.
We can certainly do that.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, the total liability for those outside districts was about 10 million in our latest valuation out of the 23 billion total. So it's well less than maybe a 1/10%. So.
Any additional questions on stakeholders? Okay, go ahead and please continue with the presentation.
Okay.
Okay, so on the next slide, I'll explain in more detail what's included in our projects. So in the experience study, we review the vested terminated retirement rates.
So those might talk just a little bit about what that group is.
So this group is a group that has left LACERA and has not yet retired, but they are vested in that they will eventually get a retirement benefit.
Yeah. So
Would that include reciprocal members?
I believe it does.
Yeah, anyone who's not currently an active member, but they have not yet retired, so they're in that in-between zone.
Yeah. And we look at these members' retirement rates in more detail than in the retirement study because our benefit stream for OPEB varies whether it changes by age. So as someone gets older, their benefits are likely to increase their claim costs until they hit 65, where Medicare hits in, and so their benefits will drop, but they'll continue to be increased. So it's kind of a up, cliff down, and then up again as far as the benefits go.
Yeah, and there are some who are not Medicare eligible, so for those, the benefit keeps going up, but there are some others that where Medicare does kick in. It just depends on their Medicare coverage status. But retirement age is important, so that's why those members are included in our experience study.
And then on the OPEB demographic side, once someone retires and receives a LACERA retirement benefit, we look at what's the likelihood that someone will elect a medical or dental and vision plan. The contributions are based on service to the premiums, and so we look at this based on years of service. Once someone does elect a plan, we look at the likelihood of which plan they'll be enrolled in, whether it's a Kaiser or a Anthem Blue Cross or a Cigna. And then we also look at who do they enroll from their family, whether it's their partner or their children, or even if it's a surviving spouse, whether they're enrolled as well. We also look at some other OPEB assumptions like the spouse age difference, which we have seen in the past varies by gender. And then we also look at the economic assumptions. So those include the investment and return assumption for the OPEB trust, which is different from the investment return assumption from the retirement trust. We also look at the trend rates for the Part B reimbursement, the pre-65 medical benefits, the post-65 medical benefits, as well as dental and vision. Now, one thing to note is that we've already included the retirement benefit-related demographic and investment assumptions in our 2022 valuation.
Not investment, right? I mean,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the economic assumptions including
inflation, salary scale.
That's right.
Right, but different investment return in the OPEB trust because that trust is invested differently than the pension trust. So the investment return, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit too. Yeah.
Okay. So the value. What?
Yes. Question. More question.
So the demographic information, that includes gender. Does it include race?
Go ahead.
Trustee Moore, the demographic assumption where we review it by gender is just for the likely spouse age difference. We do not look at race as far as assumptions go.
So the demographic assumptions then aren't translated into the cost of males versus females, for example?
Correct. The results do not delineate between gender.
But,
Even though that is a factor.
well, I
It's-
don't know what you're saying. Just time out. We do have different.
We do have different
for gender.
assumptions
That's what
for
he's-
gender.
That's what he's asking about, I think.
Trustee Moore.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Does
Okay.
the demographic information go down, what level of detail does it go down to when you're projecting how much cost you're gonna incur for healthcare services for this group?
Yeah, it goes to gender, age, and plan that they elect, and family size. So if they enroll a spouse versus a child, so we look at all those dimensions. Plan,
Do you do anything related to their income?
there's no income delineation, just plan, gender, family size, age.
All right, that's all.
Yes.
The family size, that children would be minimal at that.
Right, children being much younger would be minimal.
Well, I mean, you're
or
talking about,
smaller cost.
yeah, you're talking about older people, right? Or is this-
True.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you would not have a lot of, yeah, because a child is off at age 26.
In general, unless they're disabled, and
They're
then
disabled,
they would
okay.
stay on longer.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
You can continue.
Any other questions on that?
Okay, so when we get to the valuation assumption stage, that's where we develop the claim costs, and that is by age. And we also will update the trend that we developed in the experience study with the July 1, 2024 health plan premiums. Those premiums help us to tune up the first year trends.
How has your experience been making these assumptions? How have they worked? Have they been pretty close? If you go back and, let's say in 21, you made certain determinations. In 23, are they pretty close to what was accomplished?
Yeah, Trustee Ocum, every time we do the valuation, we look retrospectively to see how close we were from last year's measurement to this year. And typically, the unexplained variance is less than 1% of the total. We tend, I'd say more years than not, our claims have come out a little bit lower than expected. And then, of course, investment return can be above or below. That's the other big one. But then the demographics can vary a little bit. But yeah, typically the unexplained differences are typically less than 1%.
Okay. On the next slide, we'll talk about the data that we use. In August, we received the census data for the retirees, their partners, and the children. And then we also receive any late enrollee census data in November. We obtained the retirement active and terminated members census data from the retirement valuation in October. And as we receive this data, we process it into our necessary valuation formats. Okay. Next slide. On the experience study, as I've mentioned before, we've already included the retirement-related assumptions in 2022. Our last OPEB experience study was in 2020. For this experience study, we'll utilize data from 2021, 2022, and 2023. And we'll look at it on a combined basis for all plan sponsors under the OPEB program. So we do not delineate between the various agents. The OPEB experience study will include the initial enrollment, plan and tier selection, the spouse age difference, likelihood of Medicare enrollment in the Anthem plans, and remarriage. As I mentioned before, we'll look at the retirement election rates for those that have left LACERA but are still eligible for retirement benefit. On the economic assumptions, we look at the OPEB investment return as well as the trend. We'll have a discussion of the amortization method, which Robert will speak to later, as well as the remarriage assumption. The valuation, at the valuation stage, we will adjust our first year trends from the experience study so that we can include the July 1, 2024 premiums.
Yeah, so the trend word may be a new word to some of you, but that's the word we use to describe the health cost increase each year. We call it medical or health cost trend, which includes medical inflation, but it also includes what we call utilization. So if people are using certain services more than they used to, that's typically not included in the inflation, but it's included in the trend. So trend is typically higher than if you were to look at medical CPI. That would be lower than the trend that we use, since it includes more than just inflation. Any other questions before we move on and talk more specifics on the assumptions? Okay.
Oh, Mr. Oakham?
Yes.
You're doing a lot of these. Do you
Yeah.
use other data from other organizations for certain things that you're looking at that will help you do a better job, or, or is it just only looking at data from LACERA or the OPEC or whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question, Trustee Oakham. So it depends on the assumption. So this particular valuation has a very large number of people in it. So certain assumptions we would use the experience so it's very customized when we look at retirement patterns, because you've got a big enough population that the retirement patterns are what we call credible from a statistical perspective. So retirement patterns, terminations of employment, but when it comes to, for instance, mortality tends to be based more on a national table based on periodic studies of public employers across the country. And then we kind of adjust the national table for characteristics like, white collar versus blue collar. And then we also look at total mortality statistics and make some overall adjustments. But the base table is a national table. And then it has mortality improvement built into it based on some, again, national statistics of historical and, potential future improvement in mortality. So the idea that people born, 20 years ago have a longer life expectancy than people that were born 40 years ago because of technological advances and the tendency of people to live longer. When it comes to investment return, that is very customized to your investment mix because every public plan has slightly different investment mix, so we have to customize that. But that's why I say it kind of depends on the assumption. I hope that helps. Yeah, okay. Any other questions on this page before we get into some more of the details?
I see none.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide then. The economic assumptions. So we've alluded to this a little bit, so I won't belabor the point, but I'll talk a little bit about the details here. So the investment return is based on the trust that's been set up. That trust has been funded by the county, LACERA, and the Superior Court for the last several years. I think it's between 2 and 3 billion of assets now are in that trust. And Makita, the investment consultant for the trust, develops capital market assumptions. So those are assumptions about expected returns of different asset classes like stocks and bonds and different things like that. And they update that every year. So we're going to incorporate their 2024 update, which they'll be working on here in the coming months. We're going to incorporate that into this valuation to have the latest investment, since they're the investment experts, we'll have the latest data from them on expected returns, and we'll build that into the OPEB assumption. For agents that don't pre-fund through the trust, they just pay benefits as they come due. Those agents have a return. This is based on GASB requirements. Their return assumption is based on the county general asset investment, which tends to be very short term, and so it's a lower interest rate. So that investment return assumption then, as I said earlier, it's different than the pension plan because of the difference in asset allocation for the OPEB trust versus the pension trust. Any thoughts or questions there before we move on to the next item? Okay. So this is just a different way of looking at it. Just to summarize, we have the 3 pre-funding agents, and the investment return assumption for them is currently 6%. And that's based on our 2020 experience study. And then the general assets rate of return is 2.3%, again, based on our 2020 experience study for those outside district agents. So again, we're going to get updated information from Akita and the county to evaluate those assumptions this time. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Oh, yes, sir.
If you look at investment returns, okay, back in 12, 14, you're down to 4.35 and 3.75. Have we been meeting the 6% the last 4 or 5 years?
There have been years when we've exceeded it and years when we've been short of it.
Have we been averaging that the last 4 or 5 years?
Great
6%?
question. I haven't recently calculated a multi-year average. That's usually in your investment consultant report. So I would have to look at the latest. I have not looked at the latest report.
Well, where do you get the 6% when, I mean, I haven't been on the investment board for about 2 or 3 years.
So the 6%, yeah, that's a great question. Trustee Oakham, Makita comes up with long-term, and when I say long-term, I mean like 10 plus years, expected returns by asset class. So they may say stocks are expected to earn 8%, bonds maybe 5%, and then there may be other investments in there. And then based on, let's say 8 and 5, and those are just hypothetical, I think they're close. If the fund is 60% stocks and 40% bonds, then we would just take the average, the weighted average based on that. And that's how we come up with it. We look, it's a totally forward-looking assumption based on the projections we get from Makita.
Okay.
But they're the ones that would do the comparisons to the past.
Mr. Grable here for the
Yes.
save.
Thank you. Coming to my rescue here. The investment expert speaks.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, trustees, and a thanks to Jude for texting me the results. The 10-year number is annualized 6.6%, 5-year 6.1%, and through November year-to-date was 9.5%. December 60-40 was up 4.5%. So just do the math, and these numbers I believe that I just shared are through November.
So the 6% seems to be pretty
Yeah,
spot on.
it's a little on the conservative side, which is nice. You'd like to be a little conservative if you can. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay. This slide number 18 here is just a history. So this is a history of our assumption, not a history of the actual return. It just goes back to the first valuation for the OPEB program back in 2006, where we had an assumption of 5%. And this was back when the fund was unfunded, not pre-funded. Pre-funding didn't start till about 5-6 years ago. So back then, it was pay-as-you-go, and we had a flat 5% assumption for a while. Then it actually came down when interest rates were lower. And then as interest rates kind of stabilized, it kind of ended up at 4.5. Then it came down some more. If you look at the outside districts, that's really related to the interest rate being lower during that period of time. And then with the pre-funding agents, we've been at 6% ever since 2018, and we'll see, where it ends up in 2023. From what I've seen, there's a possibility these assumptions could be higher this next time. The reason I say that is that short-term interest rates, medium-term interest rates are longer or are higher than they used to be. So that'll affect the outside districts. And then for the pre-funding agents, it'll depend on the updated Makita assumptions. But I suspect it'll be inching a bit higher potentially. We'll have to see how it turns out. Okay, next slide. Another economic assumption that I alluded to earlier is the health cost trend rate. So again, trend is what we call it. We don't use the word inflation, although inflation is a component of that assumption. It's not the total assumption. We call it trend. So inflation is a component of it. And since the valuation is completed after the renewals are announced for the first year, that's July 1 of 2024, we do reflect those renewals in the short-term trends. We also look at the difference between medical and pharmacy trends and use that in our assumptions, both pre and post-65, because the pre-65 plans are different than the post-65 plans. Since some of the members are eligible for Medicare at 65. So we take that difference into account. We also look at a more macro picture where we look at what the US economy will be able to sustain in medical costs over the very, very long term. Because this valuation starts with people as they are today, and it projects them all the way out for their lifespan. So, think about your youngest member, which may be in there around age 20. We have to project for their entire lifespan. So we're looking, 80 years into the future, 80 plus years. And so we actually have to, I know it seems kind of crazy, but we have to project how much medical is going to cost, 60, 70, 80 years from now. And, it's just one of those things that's part of actuarial existence is you've got to project. So when we look that far into the future, we have to take into account what we call a macroeconomic approach that looks at the U.S. economy and what can the economy sustain over the long run in terms of medical costs versus GDP. So that's why that is an important factor in what we do. And we have another factor called excess medical cost growth, which really is looking at technological changes and utilization and things like that. And then there is a small component of the premium that is the administrative cost. And that administrative cost can trend at a different rate. So we look at that as well. So for all these reasons, we do end up with a slightly different trend pre-65 versus post, because the behavior of pre-65 plans and post is different. And then there's a different trend rate for dental and vision plans, and yet a different one for the Part B premium, which is based more on the annual reports that are produced by the Social Security trustees. They publish a report every year that we utilize because they actually look at the very, very long 60, 70, 80 year term, and a lot of the data in that report helps us set that assumption for Part B premium trend.
I have Mr. Green with that.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, in the assumptions, I believe it might be pertinent, and I might be off base here, but there, we have, a lot of these assumptions that are help model this. But what about legislative impact? I mean, is that evaluated? And, it's like we talk about with the pandemic, chance favors a prepared mind. What if You know, we dealt with this last year at NC PERS, you know, things, or even at a local government level. Are you accommodating for that? And if so, if there's a report, and I would even ask, you know, is it something that you guys can expand upon, you know, a scenario-based, I mean, you know, I mean, not just throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing if it sticks. I mean, you know, kind of trending legislation that's being talked about and going to committee and whatnot, both nationally and local level. So is that something that you guys look at?
Trustee Green, yes. So that is, there's a lot of activity, of course, over the last, ever since, you know, healthcare reform, and even before that, there was activity from the legislative angle, and I take it that's what you're really referring to. And so, yeah. So one example would be last year, or I guess it was in 22 now, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, and that had some implications for Medicare eligible retirees. And those implications are anticipated in our current trend assumptions. As far as things that are being talked about, it's a little bit hard to reflect those if you don't know what's going to happen yet. It's certainly possible to do studies to see what the impact would be of various proposals.
And I guess how labor intensive would it be to mock up a scenario? I mean, another actuary, we presented that with, for example, the post PEPRA employment. You know, our you know, we asked to kind of what's that going to look like? You know, looking out. You know, is it too labor intensive as far as the work? And I would ask that there would be something probably to, you know, using your risk management process to base with your contemporaries that are also looking at this in staff too. Is it how difficult would it be to throw a couple things out there and see what it looks like?
One example, I think, of what you're
with significant. Yeah. I mean, really trying to search significant impact that would jeopardize them. Yeah,
I guess one of the biggest areas that is often examined is the variance in economic scenarios. So, for instance, in a pension fund, you see investment return, and you see what they call stochastic projections that look at, you know, thousands of scenarios of potential returns and what that could do to the funded status. So that's one example that we could certainly apply to the retiree health trust. We haven't done that in the past, but that's something we could certainly do. We could also look at potential variability in medical cost, just because, you know, to some degree there is randomness involved in medical cost, and things like pandemics, that's a random event that hopefully only comes around every 100 years. But yeah, certainly it's possible to model those types of things. And I would say it's moderately labor intensive, but with the, you know, the computer software and programs that we have now, it's not a too heavy a lift to look at potential variation from the two major things, which I would say are investment return and medical cost variation.
I would also add, Trustee Green, that on the GASB 75 accounting reports, we do show sensitivity analysis for plus or minus 1% of discount rate, investment return assumption, as well as the trend assumption. Yeah. So that can kind of explain, like on a percentage basis, what the impact of a 1% change would be.
And it's 1% change compounded over the long run. It's not just 1% for 1 year. It's like 1% every single year. So that gives you a feel for the variation of some potential change.
So assuming, you know, some type of legislative impact, you looked at that as the metric too.
Yeah, it's one of the metrics that can affect things. You're right. Okay. All right. I think I've covered slide 19, so we can go to slide 20 unless there are other questions. All right. So there are some similarities this year. The pattern we've used in the past is to use the next year's premium data, which gives us a definite trend for the first year, and we'll continue doing that. And that data is available in March of 2024. So we'll use both the 23-24 premium and then the 24-25 premium as we work through this valuation. We're going to shift gears now and go into some discussion items for our experience study.
Before you move on, I'll just let everybody know we're about halfway through the presentation. We're going to continue through the presentation and then we'll take a break. So for your break planning,
okay.
I know where we're at. Go ahead, please proceed.
So on the next slide, one of the items we intend to cover in our experience study report this time is our amortization period. So think of a valuation that we're doing as a calculation of the present value of all the future medical, dental, prescription drug, and death benefits for the overall LACERA OPEB program. And so that present value, because a trust is set up, there's an orderly way of funding that present value. And right now, what the county does is, and LACERA, is they've established a funding schedule. And that funding schedule has them adding a certain amount every year to the contribution. So, and that amount is in the 59 million a year range, I guess now. So every year they add an incremental value to what they're contributing, in addition to the pay-as-you-go cost. And then LACERA kind of does the same thing in lockstep on a proportionate basis. So those contributions are going in, but there's still a deficit then between the total present value of all those benefits and the money that's in the trust. And that difference is what we call the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. So the abbreviation is UAAL. It's unfunded. It's actuarial because we calculate the liability, so it's an actuarial number. And it's the accrued portion of that liability. So the portion that's attributable to people's service earned to date. So that present value, which happens to be in the neighborhood of $23 billion, that's the ultimate target on a present value basis. And at the last valuation, we had assets of $2.4 billion. So the unfunded was a little over $20 billion. So over time, that unfunded liability has to be funded in some fashion. And so far, the fashion that it's being funded is based on a 30-year amortization. So what that means is we take that unfunded liability, let's just call it 20 billion in round numbers, and we calculate an amortization payment on that. And it's very similar to what you do on a mortgage. So you do a principal and interest payment on that liability. And the 30-year is something that's been around since the inception of GASB. So the first GASB statement was that applied to OPEBs was GASB 45 back in 2006. And it had an annual required contribution requirement, and that's the ARC abbreviation. And that requirement was a 30-year amortization. So the way it works, 30 years, since it's an open 30, which means every valuation we re-amortize over 30. So it's like, it's always 30. You never do, it never goes to 29, 28, 27. So because it's an open rolling 30, it never gets fully paid off. And that means the funded ratios, although they increase, they'll increase more slowly than if you had a shorter amortization method. It would be like, having a 30-year mortgage, but re-amortizing the mortgage over 30 years every year. So you'd never actually pay off your house if you never went to 29, 28, 27. Now, there is an actuarial standard of practice. That's the ASOP abbreviation. So that standard of practice was recently changed, applying to pension plans, to require an amortization of the unfunded actuarial accrued liability that meets a different standard than the 30-year open. And any of you that work on the pension side or on the pension trustees would have seen that on the pension side, the amortization period ends up being shorter than 30 years because of this ASOP requirement for pension plans. That requirement does not yet apply to OPEB plans. So we're still at 30 years, but because we are anticipating that it could apply to OPEB plans within a few years, we want to start talking about it now, just so that it doesn't, come as a surprise later on when it does become an actuarial standard. So are there any questions? This is kind of a complicated topic, but think of it as how we pay for that mortgage, essentially.
Are you going to show scenarios of how it'd be with the 25-year versus the 30-year?
Yeah, we intend to show some scenarios. Certainly, if there are suggestions, I hear 25 versus 30. That's one idea. We do work on a lot of other systems, and we'll probably take a lot of that into account as well, and kind of how other systems handle this. But yes, we do plan to come with some scenarios and show you the impact of some different amortization schedules. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say that I suggest keeping it in line with what we think that the changes are going to be. So whatever the legislative, or not legislative, but the advisement or whatever guideline changes that you do, that should probably be what we're looking at, so that we see that direct impact and we can plan ahead for that. Mr. Oakham.
As you re-up to 30, and as you're doing this on a continual basis, does that liability go down from the 23 billion? Does that start going down?
Yeah, well, 23 is the total, and then if assets are between 2 and 3, you end up with a leftover of 20 that's really your. So it's the 20 that it doesn't really go down, actually, if you keep doing it 30. What it does is, we do projections every year, and what happens is the assets do grow, but the liability is growing faster. So the funded ratio, though, does go up. And in our long-term projections, what's our funded ratio now? I think it's about 15%. Our 30 to 50-year projections have that funded ratio going out to maybe 60%. So, but it never gets to 100 with a 30-year amortization, because it can't. You're always re-amortizing over 30, unless you had an investment return that was just out of sight, which could happen, but is.
But this includes investment and health, the number you're talking about, the 20. That would make me a little nervous. I mean, should it not make me nervous when you're talking about 20 billion in the hole?
Not if it's being funded and there's a plan to get it funded. And I think the plan right now is quite a long-term plan. I mean,
But you've taken account of the ages of when they're going to retire, the whole.
Oh, yeah.
That's the whole. So therefore, there's going to be enough money at that 2.3 to fund that, and the money that's being funded for the mortgage payment that they're making.
Right. So, the minimum threshold is you got to pay benefits, right?
Yeah.
So we project that there will be more than enough money to pay for benefits, such that there will be plenty of assets accumulated. There just won't be enough assets to cover all future benefits until the trust gets to closer to 100%.
Okay.
And we think it's going to take a shorter amortization period to ultimately get to the 100. I mean, the current method will get to the 60s, within 30 to 40 years. It's just not projected to get to 100%.
I have Mr. Kreinman with a comment, and then followed by Mr. Knox.
Yes, I just wanted to bring to your attention that as a result of some of the funding policies that this board has set, that LACERA has been making double contributions. And so I want
Yeah.
to make sure that
That's a good,
when you say that we're never going to get there,
Well,
Sarah's going to get there. if we
Based on the
continue
30-year
Ba- based on the 30, but yes, LACERA has, the LACERA component of the total, LACERA has chosen to fund well in excess of the 30.
Correct.
The county is not yet funding the 30, but will ultimately get there so that their policy ramps them up to get to the 30-year amortization basis. And then in our projections, the county assumes that they will continue on that basis. LACERA has embarked on a more ambitious approach to get there more quickly.
I have Mr. Knox followed by Mr. Green.
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in and hopefully I don't confuse things, but
Yeah,
the county traditionally has done the pay-as-you-go for the benefits. And they have put into place a plan where they are ramping up, as you mentioned, their annual contributions to pre-fund OPEB. So they add 25 million on top of whatever they did last year. So that amount gets bigger and bigger. So in 27, 28-ish, the county will be doing the pay-as-you-go, plus they will be making what is expected in terms of all those future benefits. So that's a very positive thing, that the county will be contributing by that time, based on all these increases, what we would be expected to pay to cover all that future stuff. It doesn't mean we have 27 or whatever billion dollars on deposit, but we don't really need that. And when we go to New York and do the presentations, the rating agencies like that we have this plan. They like that we're sticking to the plan. They like that we're on track to, in 27, 28, be hitting what we are supposed to be contributing every year. So it's a very solid plan. The county has been a very good partner in sticking with that plan through good budget times, through bad budget times, through COVID, et cetera. So we're on very solid footing from that respect.
yeah, I would concur with that. Most of the plans I work on aren't even funding more than the pay-as-you-go cost. So LACERA and the county are way ahead of that. I think California plans in general are in better shape. I work on some that are funded, and then I work on some in other states that have chosen not to pre-fund. And so you're in much better situation than those plans.
I have Mr. Green.
Thank you. So yeah, the UALL, I mean, that's just, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's just assuming that everybody that's in servitude, all liabilities of the fund retire at the same time and require the fund, and there's a tipping point between the unfunded liability and future projections with population and everything else, right? So,
Right.
I've a couple questions. LACERA, has doubled their contribution in pre-funding. What about and the county is yet to catch up, and that'll lead to my next question. But what about our partners? Is anybody else kicking in a little extra?
Superior Court would be the other one. Yeah, you could talk to that.
Trustee Green, Superior Court is the other agent that is pre-funding, and their policy is to pre-fund as they can. So they look at if they have a surplus, they will pre-fund their surplus.
Gotcha. And so that leads me to my next question. The ARC requirements, I mean, we were talking about changing the amortization schedule. How stringent are that? Is the 30 the floor, the base, that we must start there, and, you can't, like, let's say, go to a 40 or 50-year amortization. What is the mechanism to get away from that? And and ultimately the last thing I had was the LACERA's change for the pension with the ASOP, that the pension's gone. Is that, if it goes that way, you guys are factoring in that? So it's a two-part question. I mean, I don't mean to throw everything out there, but they only give me a couple minutes.
Can I also throw out to that we're not necessarily looking at changing the amortization schedule. We're just
Correct.
looking at what those impacts would be. So
Right.
there's people
It's
listening
more
right now that might panic if they think that.
Right. We're not trying to incite any panic.
Yeah,
We're just trying to get you ready for a few years down the road when we anticipate that those pension standards may ultimately apply to OPEB. We just don't want you to be blindsided when that comes.
Yeah, I'm aware. So it's just information, but that we haven't factored that in the projections yet.
Not yet.
In your evaluation. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So back to that second question, the ARC requirements, not that we're changing anything as Mr. Chair Kehoe said, but what are we bound to with that?
Are you asking what we think the new requirements could be, or?
No, I'm sorry, for clarification, there's an ARC requirement
Yep.
that came out of the initial study in '06.
Yep.
Right? And, they have this ARC requirement and, you said everything's looked at a revolving 30-year, right?
Yes.
You can't, so how stringent is that? If it was recommended, as an example, to re-amortize it at a 20-year, 25-year, whatever it is, how stringent is that? Because it's obviously the county's not meeting that.
Yeah. Well, the stringency, so there's even if the actuarial standards change, it would not require the county to fund more. It would just require us to measure what they are funding against a stricter standard, but it would not require them to do it. But it would show that they're contributing less than the new standard,
And so
which may not be a desirable outcome.
Right. So for us, LACERA, if staff, you guys, and anybody else, looking at this, determined that, hey, our amortization schedule should be X. And that comes to the board, do we have the ability to get away from those ARC requirements? That's specifically my question. Is that 30-year amortization the minimum floor, or can we adjust that and do a 40-year or a 25-year to close that gap with the UAL?
Well, of course, a longer period won't close the gap.
Right, but for the sake of argument.
I mean, the county could stop pre-funding tomorrow if they didn't. I mean, there's no requirement to pre-fund at all. So that's the first thing I would say. But it's prudent to pre-fund because that price tag is not going down, it's going up. So it's really, yeah, but what we're gonna try and do is show you the impact if you pre-fund it at a faster rate and kind of show you what that could do in the long run versus funding continuing.
You could get away from the 30 years.
You could, sure.
Guys refinance this thing at 15 years.
Yep.
Using the homeowner analogy that it came to the board, we could do that without any kind of risk or ignoring our fiduciary responsibility or legal risk or this ARC.
It's how we report our unfunded liability, though. So there wouldn't be a benefit to any of us to project it at, say, 15 years versus 30 years unless we were required to, because it would make it look like we were more upfunded than we were.
Correct.
It would actually be better to keep it at 30 years, but to put more money down to try and pay us off sooner.
Agreed.
So,
The requirement is the unfunded liability.
but I think what we're concerned about is the potential of the actuarial standards being revised to lower it or to bring us in alignment with the way the investments are done, which would then make it look like we're more unfunded than we are. So we should just be aware of that. But I don't think there would be any benefit for this board to actually change our policy on that unless we were required to.
Yeah.
Is that a good analysis?
I think that's a good analysis, yeah. Yep. Okay. We can go to the next slide, I think. So this just gives you a flavor of what some of the amortization methods might be. So we could stay with open, but the period would come down from 30. There could be a layered approach, which is what happens on the pension side. It could be level percent of pay or level dollar. We think level percent of pay is more likely because it's more budgetable if it's percent of pay. And there could be some transition considerations as well. So I don't need to say a whole lot more about this since we've had quite a bit of discussion and I don't want don't want to overstep the time here. So let's go ahead and we're going to change to a slightly different topic. There is one particular assumption that was mentioned earlier. It's what we call the remarriage assumption. So the OPEB program with LACERA and the county, this program allows for enrollment of a new spouse or domestic partner after retirement if the retiree or the spouse were to die. There is a chance to re-enroll another spouse. That's somewhat of an unusual provision. A lot of plans that we work with don't have that provision. So over time, we have developed a set of assumptions that apply to that. When we first started doing these valuations, we had no idea what the actual experience was going to be, of how often this would happen, and then how much impact it would have on the liabilities. But there is quite a bit of work that goes into it. So for this study, we're going to re-examine it and run it both ways to understand better what the significance of this assumption is. And we may propose a simplified approach if the impact of this assumption is sufficiently small. So we're just letting you know that it's one of the ones we're going to look more closely at. All right.
Quick question, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Knox.
So just so I'm clear, this is a very cute slide, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
You could only remarry while you're still actively employed, no? This isn't.
This is when you're retired. So I'm 70 years old. I'm retired. I have a spouse that's 75. If I die or my spouse dies, there's the opportunity for the spouse to re-enroll a new spouse.
I don't think so.
Cassandra, I'm sorry to do it to you, but can you come on up and
Yeah, I'm not
give us a
understanding
quick
that. I
briefing?
thought
I was totally unaware of this.
in order for medical coverage to be insured, you would have to be married for at least 1 year while you were employed.
There is a remarriage. Yeah, I'll let her.
That is correct. They have to be married 1 year prior to retirement in order to be able to continue with the health care benefit.
Right.
Under Tier 2, there's no issue because the county doesn't pay for dependents. But they can remarry under Tier 1, and that spouse can be covered on the health care benefit program.
Now
retirement.
the spouse,
In retirement, just not the pension, correct.
so the spouse, if you're retired and you remarry, my understanding is that, and I just had this conversation yesterday, the retiree gets remarried, that spouse is eligible for retiree healthcare benefits until the retiree passes.
Correct.
Once he passes or she passes, then the spouse has the option to go onto a COBRA plan for 3 years.
Correct.
Okay.
Who pays that?
They do.
That's 100% paid by the member or the.
Okay, so the
eligible
pension goes away if they're not remarried prior to retirement.
That's correct.
But they can get health care coverage that covers them until the member passes away.
Correct.
Then it shifts to a cover. Thank you.
That's correct.
And as soon as they're married, that spouse can go on the plan?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
There's no waiting time
There's 30 days.
for 30 days?
The new spouse.
For the new spouse, if they inform us within 30 days of the marriage, then there's no waiting period.
Right.
Are people aware of that, or we don't want to make it aware of
It's
that?
in our communication. And when they call, we do inform them.
I'm praying I'll never need to use that.
Yes.
Very, very happily, very.
Sean, you don't want to use it.
I don't.
Okay. Right, so that's all I have to say about that one. Yeah, I think everybody got the point. Thank you. So, yeah, the next slide is just more of a verbal description of what our current assumptions are. Right now, we assume that if a spouse or domestic partner or dependent dies, which is the first scenario, so person's retired and their spouse or domestic partner or dependent dies, we assume there's a 1% chance of them enrolling a new spouse or domestic partner and a 2.5% chance of them enrolling a new dependent. And then if the retiree dies, it's 2 or 2.5%, depending on the type of member there.
Of course, that
So-
doesn't affect anything because we don't pay for that, is that correct?
Well, you do pay for it as long as that retiree's alive.
No, I'm talking about what you said there, once somebody dies. If
Well,
somebody
once
dies.
the second person dies, I believe, then they go on COBRA.
Right,
Yeah, so at that point, it wouldn't be a liability anymore.
yeah,
But before that point, there would be a cost to the system.
okay.
All right. So we may be simplifying that if we conclude that it has a de minimis impact. We'll come up with a simplified approach. I think that takes us to the end of our prepared comments. I will note that we have some background information in the appendix, along with a glossary, since we tend to use lots of acronyms, and it was requested that we include that. So we are in a normal, our normal approach is to include that glossary in all of our presentations now. But happy to sit for any other questions. I hate to stand too much in the way of your break, but any further questions?
Let's open it up for additional questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative and actually perfect for our new trustees. So.
All right.
Perfect. Okay, then what we'll do, we'll go into a short break. What is it, 10:40? So, or almost 10:40. So let's go 10:50. We'll meet back at 10:50. Give everybody a 10-minute break.
Recording stopped.
And our next item is a report on our education on ethics and compliance governance program structure and program charter. And the good news is that the last presentation and this presentation does count towards our educational components.
Right.
Perfect. Okay, and Mr. Rice, go ahead and take that.
Thank you, Chair Keough, and good morning, trustees. If you could go to slide 3, please. This presentation provides background on staff's efforts and plan in working to achieve the compliance goal of the strategic plan that the board approved last July, and what a LACERA ethics and compliance program might look like. Earlier on today's agenda during the consent calendar, the board approved a recommendation coming up from the Operations Oversight Committee to forward a draft ethics and compliance program charter to the JOG-C. So that will be the next step in the journey of this program through our governance structure. But because this is a new program and because there's a lot to it and that will involve this board as well as the Board of Investments and other governing bodies, we wanted to get started early in the process with some education about what the program is, what the roles and responsibilities of the players are, and what the organizational chart for the program will look like. And our efforts are relatively advanced, but even saying that, there's still a lot of work to be done, and we're kind of at the infancy, really, even though it's an advanced infancy, but we're still in the infancy of this. So the charter that was presented to the OOC you approved today, and we're going to the JOG-C, is a work in progress. And so we hope this presentation will be interactive. Going on to slide 4, please. The proposed charter that we have put together follows the Institute of Internal Auditors three lines model, which we've reviewed with the board in the past. And the chart on this slide is actually incorporated into the strategic plan that the board approved. To recap what this model is, it's in relevant part for what we're doing here, it's a governance model for how an organization manages compliance risk, which is the risk that's associated with not complying with laws, regulations, policies, and procedures. The model advocates 3 lines. We're going to follow this model. The first line is the compliance efforts and risk awareness that takes place day to day in the operational divisions, and LACERA has 15 plus operational divisions, so they are the first line of compliance, and they need to be risk aware in terms of compliance, and they need to be compliant. The second line is a dedicated compliance function, and that's where we have a gap currently, because LACERA does not have and hasn't had a dedicated ethics and compliance program. We are going to be remedying that with the efforts that are underway with the guidance of our consultant and with the input of the boards. The third line, before I go on to the third line, I should say that both the first and the second line are part of management. And that's an important concept to keep in mind. So the first line of operations, of course, is part of management, but the second line of the dedicated compliance function is also part of management. This contrasts with the third line, which is internal audit. And internal audit is not part of management. They're independent of management, and their role is to provide independent assurance as to the adequacy of controls. And in other words, they're looking at what operations is doing. So internal audit will continue to have its role. This does not affect internal audit's role, except it adds to their work in the sense that they will also have the ability to audit the compliance program to make sure that the processes that it's following are sound. The purpose of the second line is to provide support to the operational divisions in complying with applicable requirements, and also, and this will be something we'll get into this in a lot in this presentation, to provide reporting to the audit committee and to the boards. If you go on to slide 5, please. This is our progress to date on this slide. After the board approved the strategic plan in July, we engaged an ethics and compliance advisor and Counsel, Kaplan and Walker, to assist in developing a best practices program. We also reconfigured the existing staff policy committee to be an ethics and compliance committee. We did that as an early step in order to promote education about ethics and compliance programs and to capture cross-divisional ideas and enthusiasm even as the program was beginning. Through these steps, we were able to develop the proposed draft charter that was in your meeting materials today, and we'll be moving on to the JOG-C. Next slide, please. Rebecca Walker from Kaplan and Walker is here today to provide a review of ethics and compliance principles. Her firm specializes in ethics and compliance. They have an ethics and compliance practice. Rebecca is a frequent speaker and writer in this field. And after Rebecca speaks, Allison and I will return to talk a little bit about the draft charter and next steps.
Thank you, Steve. Turn my mic on. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Steve. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be part of LACERA's initiative. I wanted to start by just commending the organization and the board and the legal team for the very thoughtful approach that they have taken in implementing an ethics and compliance program. I've worked with a lot of organizations over the past 25 years in this field, and it's rare to see an organization take such a thoughtful and diligent approach to establishing an ethics and compliance program. And should also just say, as LACERA's outside counsel, there's obviously a lot of compliance happening at the organization, and there has been for the organization's history. This is really an effort to formalize a lot of those compliance systems and to take a formal approach to preventing and detecting misconduct. So Steve asked me to spend a few minutes talking with you all today about what an ethics and compliance program is, why organizations develop them, and what they look like. So starting with that first question, what is it? It's really just a governance and management system that is designed to prevent and detect misconduct. I mean, in the extraordinarily highly regulated and complicated world in which LACERA operates, it really behooves the organization to take a proactive approach to preventing misconduct. In the last 20 years or so, criminal fines and regulatory fines, the cost of regulatory and criminal violations is so high that it's really just part of risk management, legal and compliance risk management, to think about where violations might occur and to create controls in the form of training, policies, monitoring, auditing, to create controls to try to prevent misconduct and detect it when it does occur, hopefully in very early stages so that you can sort of prevent large harm from befalling the organization. So that's the goal of an ethics and compliance program. And the government, various regulators and enforcement officials have provided a lot of incentives for organizations to implement compliance programs because they recognize that it's better to prevent misconduct from happening than to catch it after it occurs. So lots of incentives and also a lot of guidance to organizations that discusses sort of what compliance programs should look like. What does an effective compliance program look like? So if we could go to the next slide, thank you. So starting back in 1991, the federal government offered organizations a broad-based incentive to implement ethics and compliance programs, basically putting the cost of misconduct very high, so making criminal fines for organizations very high, but then promising to significantly decrease the amount of a fine if the organization had a compliance program in place. And the concept is really the government wanted to partner with organizations to prevent misconduct. So the idea is if the organization has made a good faith effort to prevent misconduct from occurring, but there's still misconduct that occurs at the organization, then the good faith efforts should be recognized and fines should be lowered. So there's that sort of broad-based incentive, which has been adopted by lots of government agencies and regulators. And also, in the 30 or so years since organizations have begun implementing ethics and compliance programs, we have a lot of social science research that supports the fact that, in fact, when organizations have effective compliance programs in place, less misconduct occurs. So ultimately, what do we want to do as an organization? We want to prevent misconduct from occurring, not just have a reduced fine if violations occur. And there's a lot of social science data to support the fact, which just sort of makes good common sense as well, that if an organization takes a thoughtful, proactive approach to preventing misconduct from occurring, that in fact there will be less misconduct at the organization. When misconduct occurs, more reporting happening. So if employees suspect violations, they're going to report it, and the organization will have an opportunity to respond and sort of decrease the impact of any misconduct. So if we could go to the next slide, hopefully that all makes sense. Also wanted to spend a minute talking with you all about the role of the board in an effective compliance program. So, as Steve said, these are really management systems. Management is creating systems to try to prevent misconduct, and we'll sort of talk about all the different elements of a program in the next slides. But one of the very important elements is the oversight, the active oversight of a board of directors in overseeing the design and implementation of a compliance program. And it's very important in part because it really takes the board to allow a compliance officer, a compliance function, sufficient independence to really be able to operate effectively. All of this was recognized beginning in the 1990s with this Caremark case that's on the slide in front of you, when the Delaware Chancery Court said, boards of directors have a fiduciary duty. It's part of the fiduciary duty of loyalty to ensure that organizations have compliance systems in place. And if boards don't ensure that these compliance systems are in place, there's a possibility that the board would be liable for the impact of misconduct at the organization. So that's a pretty big duty, right? So the idea is the board has a duty to make sure that systems are in place to prevent misconduct. If the board doesn't do so and misconduct occurs, then the board might be liable for the damages resulting from the legal violations. The Delaware court also said, look, there is this potential liability for boards, but the standard is pretty high. We're not going to just hold directors liable for any misconduct that occurs at the organization. You really have to ignore your fiduciary duty of oversight of compliance for the liability to kick in. If we could go to the next slide. So for several decades, there were lots of claims against directors that were dismissed because the organizations had some compliance systems in place. The high standard was tweaked a bit in the last few years. In this first case of Marchand versus Barnhill, this is a case against Bluebell Ice Cream Company. So Bluebell had very sad, difficult situation of a listeria outbreak in some of their plants. A few people died as a result of the listeria outbreak, a massive recall of the ice cream products, and the price of the stock fell because of the issues. Shareholder derivative suit, and the shareholders sought to hold the directors liable for the damages resulting from the listeria outbreak at the plant, which is obviously caused by employees. And the court in that case said, yes, there's potential liability for directors because the directors did not oversee the company's food safety compliance program. And food safety is a critical risk area for an ice cream company. So there's potential liability for the directors for not overseeing the compliance systems of that particular organization. And a few cases since then, including the Boeing case, the shareholder derivative litigation that resulted from the 2 airplane crashes of the 737 MAX airplanes, horrendous situations, shareholder derivative suits ensued, and the court in that case said, yes, there's a possibility that the directors would be liable for the harm to shareholders because the directors had not been overseeing Boeing's airplane safety program. This was a big case in the compliance community because Boeing actually had a pretty good compliance program. You can imagine in a company like Boeing. They had a chief compliance officer who had a direct line to that company's audit committee and who presented to the audit committee at every meeting. But the board wasn't looking at airplane safety compliance. And so the court said that creates a potential of liability for the directors for the damage to the stock price. So it's a really important responsibility for directors to oversee the company's compliance efforts and oversee compliance efforts in critical risk areas, which really implies that the board also oversees the company's compliance risk assessment procedures as well. So there's an understanding of important critical risk areas for an organization. If we could go to the next slide, please. And obviously, you feel free to ask questions as we go. Steve wanted me to spend a minute talking about the difference between ethics and compliance and management and audit. And really, compliance, my specialty, is really the system. You know, it's comprised of a lot of different parts, and we'll take a look at all those parts in just a minute. But it's the systems that are put in place to try to ensure that policies, laws, and regulations aren't violated, and if they are, that there are systems to respond to those violations quickly and effectively. Ethics is really about the culture of compliance at an organization, and that's comprised of a lot of different things. The tone at the top is obviously very important, the tone at the top that's set by the board and by leadership, hiring policies, the discussion earlier at the beginning of this meeting about recognizing employees who have contributed to the organization. All of that is part of the culture of compliance. And what ethics and compliance programs do is really try to put compliance at the heart of the ethical culture of the organization so that compliance is truly an expectation of employees. And then, of course, management, and I think Steve did a nice job of discussing audit as the third line to sort of test the controls that we put in place in compliance. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So also wanted to let you know that LACERA is not the only pension fund with a compliance program. Although I will say, and this is another thing that I've really enjoyed about this project, this initiative, it's still early days for pension fund compliance programs. So their CalPERS and CalSTRS have had their programs for a while, and they've gone through a few different iterations. But generally speaking, I think you all are still in the early days. You're at the beginning waves of compliance programs for pension funds, which is terrific. But there are lots of pension funds out there that are also on this path. I was actually speaking at a CalPERS conference in December where we were talking about compliance programs for pension funds there. So I think there will be more such speaking engagements for me in the future because there's definitely a lot of activity in this area for pension funds. But kudos to LACERA for really, I think, being part of that first big wave of compliance programs. And the regulators have also commented on the importance of compliance programs for pension funds, and that's that SEC enforcement report that's cited at the bottom of the page there. There was some insider trading at a pension fund in Alabama, and the SEC decided not to bring an enforcement action against the fund, and this is part of the incentives that are offered by regulators and enforcement officials. So oftentimes the Department of Justice or the Securities and Exchange Commission or other regulators will say, look, the organization tried to prevent this misconduct from happening. They had an effective compliance program in place. We are not going to bring an enforcement action against the organization. We will bring an enforcement action against the wrongdoer, of course, the employee who committed the misconduct, but we are not going to bring an enforcement action against the organization because they tried to prevent this misconduct. They made a bona fide, good faith effort to be a good citizen, and so we won't hold them liable. Often when the DOJ or the SEC does that, they will also issue a public statement. For the SEC, it's usually in the form of an enforcement report in which they say, we're not going to hold the pension fund responsible because they had a good compliance system in place. So just another important reason to implement a compliance program. You do get these benefits if, God forbid, you're being investigated by the SEC or the DOJ. But of course, for most organizations, and certainly for me as a compliance lawyer, the most important reason to do it is to prevent misconduct, because you want to ensure that employees are conducting business for the organization in compliance with laws and regulations. Okay, thanks. So just, well, this is not a small slide, but these are all the pieces of an ethics and compliance program, sort of organized in a way that hopefully makes sense in terms of how the program is implemented in practice. So you want to prevent misconduct, monitor for misconduct, detect it if it occurs, and then respond appropriately. In terms of prevention, that's really about awareness and culture building, right? You have your policies and procedures in your code that help employees understand what the rules are for the organization. Training and communications. Also, you want to help employees understand what the rules are. Risk assessment, so that the organization itself and the organization can advise the board on where the highest level, most significant legal and compliance risks are, to make sure that the policies, procedures, training, communications, all the other pieces of a compliance program are structured to target the most significant compliance risks. Support of the board, support of senior leadership, the culture, all of those are part of preventing misconduct from occurring. And then monitoring, reviewing, and assessing to try to monitor for gaps in controls and for misconduct, detecting misconduct, including things like having a helpline or hotline so that employees can report suspected issues, open door policies, so employees can go to their supervisors if they suspect misconduct or have concerns, investigations and oversight. And then, of course, when misconduct occurs and the regulators and others are sort of certainly clear that they understand that misconduct will occur, even where an organization has a strong program in place. You know, organizations only act through lots of employees, and sometimes misconduct occurs either inadvertently because they didn't understand what the rules are, or intentionally. When that happens, there's an expectation that the organization will try to understand where the gaps in controls were and will act to remediate those gaps.
What's the functional difference between a monitoring and detecting? Is it active versus passive? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, to some extent. So by monitoring, we mean, for example, the role, the second line role of the compliance team in periodically assessing the controls to see how well they're working. That's a monitoring function to see if any violations have occurred. But also that's part of, the detection is really about finding specific instances of misconduct that have occurred. So monitoring to ensure that the controls are working and maybe see if any violations have occurred through transaction testing, for example, that type of work. Whereas detection really points to finding a specific potential violation that you would then investigate.
Got it. So monitor leads to detecting.
Yes, but possibly, or hopefully, leads to an assurance that controls are working beautifully. But certainly can lead to the detection of misconduct as well, or potential misconduct. It's important, especially in these early days of creating the ethics and compliance program, to think about the scope of the program. So you all will be creating, you'll be having a position of Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. That role will exist within the legal department of LACERA, but you're creating a new function at the organization that, again, sort of formalizes and brings together compliance controls that are already in place, maybe adds to those a bit as well.
Can I ask you about that,
please.
since you brought it up?
Yes.
The structure, how globally, how are compliance and ethics officers placed within the organizational structure? Because I still have, and I've raised this in board meetings, I still have potential concerns about placing it in the legal office versus having a direct report to our board. But how is the rest of the world
Yeah.
structured on that? And
Yep. Great question. I will say, I wrote an article last year called "The Third Rail of Compliance: Where Compliance Functions Sit in an Organization," because it's the question of government, perhaps more than any other, and it does get to the most important attributes of a compliance function, which are independence and authority and access. So I can tell you that the data suggests that, and I would say my anecdotal experience also suggests, the majority, I would say, of compliance functions are housed in the legal department at organizations. And that's for organizations across the board, every industry, publicly held, privately held, and organizations like LACERA, and nonprofits. So typically, the compliance officer reports to the general counsel of an organization, and compliance is housed in legal. That is not always the case. And there is a lot of discussion in the compliance community about the best place to position a compliance function. In my experience, I would say the best programs I've assessed over the years, and I've worked for lots of different types of organizations, every industry, every size. I sort of prefer, all things being equal, having compliance in the law department. I think that the function is so interrelated with the work that the legal department does anyway, that there's a lot of synergies that can take place there. And it, in my experience, is pretty helpful to the chief compliance officer to have the support and sort of allyship of the general counsel in the work that she or he does. Having said that, it only works if there is a very good reporting relationship between the chief compliance officer and typically the audit committee of the board as well. And that lends the compliance function the independence, authority, and access that it really needs to function effectively. So if there were an allegation that came in that related to the law department or to the CEO or really any senior leader at the organization, having the relationship with the chair of the audit committee is just critical, because it's really impossible for the chief compliance officer to respond appropriately to any concern against a senior leader without that relationship with the board. So it has to have the relationship with the board also, but I would say the majority are in the law department, and it typically works very well. The one area where you often see, the one industry where you often see compliance sitting outside of legal is in the healthcare world. And that is in part because the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Health and Human Services has issued a lot of guidance to organizations on compliance programs. A lot of regulatory and enforcement activity in that area because of Medicare and Medicaid fraud and other reasons. So the Office of the Inspector General has said that it would prefer for compliance to sit outside of the law department and to have an independent function reporting directly to the CEO and the audit committee of an organization. And that is in part because there is a bit of a history in the healthcare world of compliance functions not operating independently, I would say, and that sort of has informed the Office of the Inspector General. But because of that guidance, oftentimes in the healthcare world, the compliance function will sit outside of legal, and in other industries as well. I mean, the data's, maybe 52% of compliance functions sit in legal, and for some surveys it might be at 42% or 30%. So the data's all over the map. But I think we can safely say that the function that most typically houses compliance is the legal function.
Has there been any documented failures with that model? It sounds like not. It sounds like that's been.
Oh, no, there are always failures, I would say. I mean, if you're dealing with just corporations, right, there
But
will
is
be.
that a function of the organizational structure, or that could be something, just a bad compliance officer or something?
Oh, certainly it could. I mean, thinking about, for example, the Boeing case, the compliance sat in legal, reporting to the chief administrative officer, which also, so the chief administrative officer, the chief administrative officer was also the compliance officer and reported into the chief legal officer. And there were some concerns there, obviously. I mean, there are compliance failures at any organization, so there can always be issues. But I would say that when there are concerns where there is it hasn't typically been the case that the issue has been the reporting relationship.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at the org chart, it would be a solid line to chief legal officer with a dashed line going to the audit committee.
And I think also a dotted line to the CEO.
CEO and
Because there has to be an opportunity as well for in my view, for the most effective types of programs, there should be a direct line to the CEO to report any concerns and a direct line to the chair of the audit committee to report any concerns. And typically also opportunities to present to the audit committee at as many meetings as are necessary or appropriate and in executive session. And I will say that having worked with Steve and Allison on putting this charter together, all of those contingencies have been considered and are built into the charter. Yeah, they've done a very thoughtful, diligent job at creating a structure that ensures independence when necessary, the authority, and the other important piece is, will the compliance officer have access to people, to data, to information when necessary? And not just to conduct an investigation, but also for monitoring purposes, for conflicts of interest, for example, is the compliance officer able to access the information it needs to make sure that conflicts are being handled appropriately? So that's another important piece that has also been really thoughtfully considered in putting this together.
Thank you very much. That alleviates some of my concerns. I do have Ms. Gray, followed by Mr. Moore.
I'm a little concerned about where you put the compliance officer's position. Your suggestion is putting it in the legal department under our chief counsel?
Yes.
Okay, and normally we would normally I'd go to the chief counsel when I have an issue that is of conflict. Now, what happens when there is an issue of conflict between the compliance officer and our chief counsel? And understand this, my understanding is that our organization is highly regulated, particularly in our investment department. So it seems like there should be a separate compliance office that might directly report to you're suggesting the audit committee, which is made up of trustees?
Well, a part of my my reasoning for suggesting that the chief compliance officer be placed in legal at this juncture is that I do think it would benefit the compliance function to have the support of the law department and the chief legal officer, especially in the early days, and the reporting relationships that would also exist to the CEO and to the audit committee will help ensure the independence that I think you're alluding to in terms of, when there might be a conflict or an issue. There is also contemplated in the sort of documentations and structure of the compliance department a specific escalation protocol that will govern what issues need to be escalated to the audit committee, to the CEO, and how quickly. So when more serious issues arise, or when in particular there might be disagreements between the chief legal officer and the chief compliance officer about a particular decision or course of action, this will be really a protocol that allows for escalation of those types of issues to the CEO and to the audit committee as necessary. So the thinking is that the relationship with legal will provide the function with a lot of very important support in sort of establishing itself and getting started, really, basically, and design, implementing the program. So the support of legal, I think, will be really important to the function. But the relationships with audit and with the CEO, which will be documented and very clearly defined relationships and access, will allow the function the appropriate level of independence and authority should there be a need to raise issues, access documents, or any sort of disagreements between legal and compliance. So I think it affords you the best of both worlds, and that's certainly the goal.
So where does our board committee, the JOGC, fit into this, Steve?
The thought of our process in navigating this through the governance structure at LACERA is this. This program is part of the Board of Retirement's strategic plan. That's where it originates. So we started the charter with the OOC. Then it comes to this board. We've recommended and the board has approved that it next goes to the JOGC. And the reasoning for going to the JOGC is that body has responsibility for joint board policies and specifically ethics and conflicts issues, which is a significant part of what ethics and compliance is all about. We considered at one point going straight to the audit committee, but we concluded that it wasn't appropriate to go to the body that derives its authority from the boards and have that body define this entire new area of authority for itself. It was most appropriate to start with the boards, have the boards decide what they want this program to be, and then it goes to the audit committee, and the audit committee will revise its charter accordingly. But the JOGC, to circle back to your question, is the next stop because of its charter responsibilities, and this ultimately is a joint program. It has to be. You can't deal with ethics or compliance and compartmentalize it between the boards. And so this board has now kind of released its idea that's in its strategic plan to the rest of the organization by referring it to the JOGC, and the boards together in the JOGC will discuss it in that venue, and then it would go back down to the boards. That's the journey that we anticipate following, and it's consistent with, we believe it's consistent with the existing charter documents and the roles and responsibilities of the various bodies, and then it'll end up at the end of the line, if all goes according to plan, with it going to the audit committee for a revision of the audit committee charter, which we've drafted now but have not shared it because it would be premature because we don't know what this board's going to do. We don't know what the JOGC is going to do, but we're prepared to move this down the path with your guidance.
So the path that you're talking about is from the board to
The JOGC,
and then back to the board?
from the JOGC back to both boards.
Both boards.
And then to the audit, hopefully the boards then will direct the issue down to the audit committee.
Okay, that makes sense.
And we do have a slide later that gets into the reporting relationships and doesn't get into the JOGC, but it gets into the reporting relationships. And I'll spend some time on that when Rebecca is finished, and you can see graphically what Chair Keogh, what you, Trustee Gray, have been talking about and what Rebecca has been talking about in terms of how we have created a structure that we believe is independent and provides backup for the success of the program, but has the ultimate authority and supervision being with the Chief Executive Officer and with the audit committee and the boards, because this is a management responsibility. It's not something that, for example, the Chief Counsel would would functionally supervise. It's something the chief counsel would administratively supervise, and that's what this program provides. And we have provisions in the charter dealing with conflicts. So if the just make it personal, if we hire a chief ethics and compliance officer, we're discussing an issue, they disagree with me, they don't have to convince me. They go direct to Santos and they go direct to the audit committee and to the boards. And there's no barriers whatsoever to that, and I have no ability to get in the way of that, and I wouldn't want to.
Sean, I got a question.
I do have Mr. Moore.
Oh, you've got
I'll-
others.
I'll
Okay,
get to
Mr.
you.
Moore, yeah.
As well.
Okay, well, Steve, you answered one of my questions about the process that information will flow through and whether or not there was going to be true independence or a filter. And you just cleared that up for me. The other thing I want to know was in the financial services industry and in the pension world, public pension systems, how are these units placed in that an environment that's similar to ours?
That's a great question. So my information about public pension fund world is somewhat anecdotal. It's still, as I mentioned earlier, still sort of early days for pension funds to be adopting compliance programs. At most of the pension funds that I've worked with and that I know of, compliance is housed in the law department with some exceptions. I think CalPERS might be part of maybe reporting up to somebody, like the chief legal officer and the chief compliance officer both report to a chief administrative officer, I think, and I apologize. I haven't looked at their program in a little while, but at all of the other programs with which I've worked, the compliance function is housed in the law department. So it is pretty common in the public pension fund world. Also, in the financial services, again, typically housed in legal, with the exception that, interestingly, in financial services, there will sometimes be a split between an ethics office and a compliance office, in which case the compliance office is part of legal and the ethics office is often not part of legal. It's either independent or maybe reporting to another function. But often in the legal world, and again, the sort of prevalent structure is to be in legal. Having said that, there are lots of great compliance programs, obviously, that are independent of, a separate function. Lots of good compliance programs, even that are part of, I've seen them in the audit department. I've seen really good compliance functions that report to the CFO. Wouldn't recommend that for a financial institution, but I have seen those in the world. So they can be placed in lots of different places. I don't mean to suggest that it has to be in the law department. I just think that, especially for a new program, my worry, if it weren't in legal, is that it wouldn't have as much support from legal as it would if it's part of legal. Not that the lawyers wouldn't very happily provide whatever support is needed, of course. But there are just lovely synergies that can occur when the function is part of legal. And the other issue I see at organizations is sometimes the compliance function is sidelined a bit when it's not part of the law department or another sort of well-regarded, well-known function. So that would be my worries. I think in the early days especially, it becomes more important to have the allyship of a functional leader who is established functional leader. And then, it might be something you want to revisit down the line. But again, it certainly can work well in a variety of different
Well, I don't
reporting
know
models.
about everybody else, but I think I would want to see what some other organizations are actually doing and whether it's early implementation or later implementation, just 2 or 3.
Yeah, Chair Keogh, can I address this question? Please. Alice and I have done a peer survey. We've done a peer survey of California 37 Act systems, other California systems, and national peers. And we're using the same peer universe that, for example, the Board of Investments relies on in its governance decisions. With respect to California systems, CalPERS, General Counsel currently oversees the Enterprise Compliance Office. At CalSTRS, General Counsel is responsible for the Office of Ethics and Compliance. At SD Serves, the San Diego City system, the General Counsel also serves as Chief Compliance Officer. We are not recommending that. We don't think that's a good model. At SD-SARA, the San Diego County system, General Counsel oversees the Chief Compliance Officer. At OSERS, the Chief Counsel oversees the Chief Compliance Officer. At Texas Teachers, General Counsel also serves as Chief Compliance Officer. We do see in the public this dual role in a number of public pension systems, including very good ones. Texas Teachers is an outstanding system, but they have a dual role. Again, something we're not recommending. In Wisconsin SWIB, the Director of Compliance is in the legal division. They're a senior legal counsel, serves as the compliance officer at Wisconsin SWIB, another system that is often a reference for best practices. And I could go on. We have looked at about 30 plus systems, and they, as Rebecca said, they're a little bit over the map, but the majority use the legal system model, and the others have a variety of systems with either the chief counsel being the compliance officer, or with it reporting to an administrative officer, or in just a few instances reporting to the chief executive officer. So we feel we are following the peer practice, the majority peer practice.
Now, has this been within the last 5 years or 10 years, or what's the time frame that this structure has been conceived, conceptualized, and implemented? Because you said earlier, early implementation and late. Well, what is that?
So this structure has been the majority of compliance programs since there were compliance programs, really. So in the last 30 years, it started as most compliance programs being housed in legal, and it has continued to be the case. I think it is particularly important to have compliance part of legal in the early days of a specific compliance program, because I think that there is some important synergies. But it has always been the case that the majority of compliance programs, sort of across the universe of compliance programs, have been housed in the legal department. I've been in the field for 25 years, and I look at this data every year, and it varies somewhat by survey and by year, but the majority has consistently been in the law department.
Chair Keogh, again,
go ahead.
If I could interject on this, this is a program that, as we discussed earlier, is to support management and the boards and the audit committee. So it needs to be a structure that has integrity, that from the very beginning, the CEO, the boards and the audit committee have confidence in. So this is an issue that we need to spend whatever time is required to not sell what's being proposed, but to develop the system that we think will work. We do believe, and this is based on conversations I've had with Mr. Kryman and Mr. Lugo, and actually a lot of others in the organization, that this is a system that will work for LACERA, but ultimately, I think the executive office should chime in on this, and you would want to get their input, as well as making sure that whatever we're doing meets your needs and is something that you would have confidence in and would have integrity in your eyes.
I have Mr. Kryman in the queue, but I know Mr. Oakham wants to ask a question, so I'd like. No, I'd like you to go first. That way, Mr. Kryman can address.
My question is this: how many incidents have we had? And I agree with you 100%, just from the legal and the political aspect of it. How many instances have we had this last year where we needed a compliance person?
Compliance is an ongoing function, so we always need a compliance officer. And if you're speaking in terms of investigations,
yes,
I would say, and this is an estimate, and this includes employment investigations and also hotline claims, that we probably had somewhere around 10 to 12, something like that, in the past 12 months.
Is that the average, Steve? You would say on a yearly basis?
Yeah, I would say it's something like that, but that's not really that's a measure of the need.
I
Because,
understand.
but it's.
Do we
it's
have
not-
to hire a compliance person then, or do we have one here?
Yes, we don't have a compliance person here now. The legal division oversees most investigations, not all. HR does some. Internal audit has handled one recently. But typically those are overseen by the legal division, and we hire outside investigators,
Yes,
probably on
right.
about half of those, maybe a
But
little
you're
bit.
still gonna have to do that with a compliance person, aren't you?
The compliance person would oversee that function to give it that additional.
Have you been overseeing that, or your department?
Yes, in conjunction with internal audit as far as the helpline is concerned, and in conjunction with HR on employment matters.
I'm looking at this, and maybe I shouldn't be doing it this way. This is gonna cost us a couple $100,000 to have a compliance officer, most probably. And I'm just wondering, if we put the program in place, is there another way to do it without spending $200,000 on compliance? Or is it absolutely necessary to have a compliance officer to be working on this on a daily basis?
This is part of the thinking that may go into the decision-making for the few systems that are decided to combine the roles. I don't know. But the key element that we're looking for is independence.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing you look at for internal audit, but compliance also needs to be independent. It's a different type of independence because compliance is part of management, but it needs to be independent. And so it needs to be it's part of operations, but outside of operations, if that makes sense from what we've discussed so far. They're on the management side of the ledger, but they're not part of any individual operational function that they would be biased in favor of.
Just last question. Is that a full-time job in your mind, that it's gonna take a person to oversee this? And I guess they'll be talking to various groups with LACERA about compliance, et cetera.
Yes, it is a full-time position, and
Okay, here's your-
Rebecca and I have spent a lot of time talking about, well, what is the type, based on her extensive experience, what is the type of person that we want for a chief compliance officer? And I think this says, what I'm about to say about, as far as the description is concerned, says a lot about what we're aiming for. We want in order for the program to work and for the person to be effective in being a senior resource for all the divisions in the organization, they have to have gravitas and they have to have experience. So it's going to be a person that has those two things.
Can we start putting this program in before we hire the compliance person so we can get ahead of the game?
This is what we've been doing since literally this was approved in July.
Okay, thank you.
And that's what Rebecca has advised us on. We have the Ethics and Compliance Staff Committee has been working on this since about September. So yes, we're trying to get a running start on it.
Mr. Kryman.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that that Mr. Rice and I and the executive team have had a number of conversations about where this particular function needs to sit. What we had determined, or what we were recommending, is that it sits in the legal office because of its infancy. And in the development of the program is going to take a lot of heavy lifting from the legal staff, because they are actually doing the conflict of interest, and they are serving sort of like a compliance officer in terms of making sure that the investigations are being completed. And so I think that at this particular stage, it is best suited to be in this particular area. We can always revisit that once it grows and once we see how it operates. And there's nothing to preclude us from doing that. And my intention is to do that. I do want you to know that I do view this as a management function, that this is not a function that Mr. Rice, in his capacity to administer the program, plays. It's really something that we are going to take very, very seriously. If you recall, when I first got here 4 years ago, internal audit, there were a number of items that were not completed, and we had a lot of difficulty in terms of implementing some of the audit recommendations. And I think that over the last 4 years, we can say that we have a very, very good working relationship with internal audit. We've done everything that we possibly can to make sure that they're independent. We meet with them regularly. We take their recommendations seriously. This program won't be any different. As a matter of fact, I probably would say that there'll probably be more attention to this particular program because it is a management function. And we want to make sure that to the extent that we can alleviate any audit recommendations that are coming from our internal audit staff, that is the goal, that we'd like to have clean audits. Although, information that we do receive from our audit team is very valuable, making sure that we implement it so that we're above board on everything. Transparency is a very, very important value for us as well. And so we're looking forward to working with our consultant and Mr. Rice to make sure that we have a program that's going to work for everyone. I think that the addition of the audit staff adds, the audit committee adds another layer of oversight that will be beneficial to the program. And we do intend on making sure that that this program is successful right from the beginning, because never underestimate the importance of a good start, is what I always say. So I think we're on the right path. I think that a year from now, this program will be up and running and we'll be able to evaluate it a little bit closer. But right now, I think the synergies are really important. The knowledge that Mr. Rice has on all the cases that we're undergoing now. We do also have Mr. Bendel that will be able to assist. And the one thing that I'd like to note, I think Mr. Knox was at the last audit committee, or maybe it was, I don't know if you were at the last audit committee. Could have been your, I think it was Elizabeth. But we did hire a new audit consultant that has a great deal of experience in the compliance area that we are planning to leverage. As a matter of fact, I believe the contract that's being negotiated will allow us to tap into his particular skill sets that we think will be important to make sure that this program is working properly. Although we want to make sure that he is independent, we do want to make sure that we leverage his experience as well in this particular area. But I think we're off to a good start. So that's what I'd like to say. It is a management function. We take it very seriously. Mr. Lugo and I often talk about implementing audit recommendations and where we are, what the status is. And I believe my entire executive team and my management team understand the importance of making sure that we're implementing these things on a timely basis.
Mr. Rue.
Just want to make it clear, and I think you're going to cover it in the later slides, but it's not just going to be one position of 200,000. This person's probably going to have a team eventually, right?
A small unit in the legal division, yes.
Right. Do you know approximately how many?
4. When fully formed, I would expect it would have probably 4.
Including the executive, so the executive and then 3 employees, or?
Yes, it would be the chief ethics and compliance officer and 3 other staff members.
Yeah. Can I also just mention that our expectation is the fund is going to continue to grow, that our investment section is going to become even more complex, and so I think this is the right time for this particular program to get stood up.
And is most chief compliance officers, do they have a legal background?
Yes, I would say probably the vast majority of chief compliance officers have a legal background, but there are certainly plenty who don't have a legal background. But yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think we can continue with the presentation.
Okay. So we were just talking about scope of the program, what matters will be within scope, what level of oversight ethics compliance will have for various subject matter areas, and that's just something that the compliance function and management will decide over time. But there just wanted to clarify that not every legal risk would be sort of closely overseen by the compliance team. The important exercise here is just to contemplate what are the legal risks, who has primary oversight, and who has monitoring responsibilities, and who has investigation responsibilities. So really just ensuring that oversight of various legal and compliance risks has been considered and delegated appropriately.
That was one of my questions I was gonna ask about the identifying high-risk areas, right? Because you used some examples, and there were some areas that the board didn't identify, and then that got them in trouble. So is the intention to hire the chief compliance executive and then let the chief compliance officer then identify those risks in conjunction with the team? So is that a future goal, or are we going to try and put that structure in place?
Yes. So first of all, I would say it was not the board's responsibility to identify those risk areas. That is also a management responsibility. And that's something that, yes, typically the chief compliance officer will engage in a legal and compliance risk assessment on an annual basis, typically, and identify the most significant legal and compliance risk areas, and the mission critical risk areas is the way the courts phrase it. And then present that information to the board so that you all are informed in your oversight of legal and compliance risks. That's the way it should typically operate.
Thank you.
And go to the next slide, please. So it's not just about investigating suspected misconduct. Just want to make clear that there are lots of different aspects to an ethics and compliance program, and you saw that earlier with that 4-part slide. So we wanted to list all of the different elements so you get a sense of the breadth of the ethics and compliance program. It's about understanding what the legal and compliance risks are, so that risk assessment process, creating policies, procedures, training, so that employees have an appropriate awareness of what the legal requirements are and how they can comply with them, reporting systems, monitoring systems, all of that, those are all elements of the ethics and compliance program, and certainly also investigations and responding to issues. And creating a culture of ethics and compliance, which, as I said, is really also mostly about the senior leadership and the tone that they set. But the role of the ethics and compliance team would be then to, for example, measure the culture of compliance through employee surveys and then respond to that data. So ethics and compliance really has a role in all of the things that are on that slide. And the next couple of slides are just, we wanted to give you a bit of a flavor of what enforcement authorities have said about how compliance programs should be structured, and what they should look like, and what makes an effective compliance program. So from a regulator's perspective, and we don't need to go through all these slides. We just wanted to give you all a bit of a flavor for really the level of detail that prosecutors and other enforcement authorities take in providing guidance on compliance programs. It really has become very important to the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission and other regulators, and they provide organizations with lots of detail about what compliance programs should look like. So we wanted to give you a sense of that, but certainly not something we need to go over, except unless you all want to, if you have any specific questions. But maybe, Bonnie, you could just sort of flip through the next couple of slides. We certainly already talked about the support of senior leadership and the board.
All right, I'll pick it up again here. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is the organizational chart that is being proposed. The ethics and compliance program will be led by a new ethics and compliance officer. That officer will head a unit of 3 or 4 people, which will enable the chief compliance officer to build a team that has the requisite expertise to deal with compliance issues throughout the organization. The unit will report administratively, and that's why we have the dotted line going to chief counsel. Functionally, the solid line will be to the chief executive officer, up to the audit committee, and to the boards. So that's where the solid lines go. That's the functional reporting. That's the lines of authority to which the Chief Compliance Officer owes primary allegiance to ensure that as we discussed before, that the managers of the organization, the leadership of the board leadership of the organization has the reporting and the information you need to respond to red flags, to improve the organization, to set policy. We have a staff ethics and compliance committee. We already have that committee in place. That's part of the running start that we discussed earlier. That will be an advisory body, hence the lightly dotted line up to the chief compliance officer, and that's a role that we know from our due diligence is a critical role, to have the chief compliance officer have access to a formal body of operational staff representatives who can be a resource and also to be ambassadors for the program in their respective divisions. Internal audit is on this chart because they're a key part of the overall risk management system that the organization has, and we already discussed earlier that compliance isn't independent in the sense that they're immune from their processes being independently reviewed. They'll be independently reviewed within the compliance unit, but also ultimately by internal audit. We recognize that this is a program that the organization will have to grow into. So we have included in the charter processes to anticipate that. So we specifically provide in the charter that it'll be subject to annual review, at least initially. The charter itself will be subject to annual review until the board determines that it's ready to go on a longer review cycle, typical of other policies. And that's to give the board the ability, both boards and the audit committee, the ability to do this, formally institutionalized in the charter, this ability to review.
Who will do the annual review? Is it going to be audit committee and both boards?
So it would be we would expect it would be similar to the chief audit executive process, which would be done by the chief executive officer and by the audit committee. That's something that could be tweaked depending on the board's appetite for actually being involved in the review process. So that the chief executive officer, the chief ethics and compliance officer will be reviewed by the chief counsel will review them, but that's a functional role. The administrative participation in that process is the chief executive officer and the audit committee, and the boards can be part of that as well.
Who's doing the hiring and the evaluation process?
The hiring will be done by the chief executive officer, chief counsel. I expect that we will have representatives of the audit committee and the boards involved in that process to the extent there's a desire to participate in that. And there may be representatives of other staff functions.
So past process of doing an ad hoc committee, but ultimately the CEO doing the final hiring. And then would the CEO do the annual evaluation based upon input, just like we do your evaluation?
I think the way it would go, and this is subject to change, but since there's a functional reporting, this would be just like with the chief audit executive, where they have the administrative reporting to the CEO who does the evaluation, but with the input of the audit committee where the functional line goes. Similarly here, since the dotted line administrative role goes to chief counsel, I would prepare the evaluation, but it would be subject to review and sign off by the chief executive officer.
My general comment is that I understand this slide now, based upon our lengthy conversation. This is not the easiest thing to understand and wrap our heads around. So I think I understand we're starting new, but perhaps we can try and get to a place where it just makes a lot more sense and it's more smoother on the org chart, because this is the craziest org chart that I've seen. And then my other general comment is that I really, although I love the work that the audit committee does, I do think that it's important to have ongoing and regular engagement with the boards themselves. So both the Board of Retirement and Board of Investments. So I'd like to ask that within the charter that there is ongoing engagement beyond just the audit committee. Because sometimes, I'm just gonna say, sometimes the audit committee works in a vacuum, separate of the board. And that's our fault too, because we just don't go to the audit committee meetings, so we don't listen to all the conversations. But I would like to have some engagement, regular engagement with the Board of Retirement and Board of Investments directly. My recommendation to the Board of Investments, but on the Board of Retirement side, I would definitely like to see that.
We can increase that. Currently, there is a lot of reporting that's prescribed in the charter. Much of it is to the audit committee. Some of it is to the directly to the boards, and we will take the input that we should strive for more balance there, or maybe even that we seriously take into consideration the amount of reporting. And as we get into the details of the charter, we can receive feedback as to what your appetite is for the level of reporting.
Additional, I see Mr. Knox.
Yeah, just a quick point to follow up on Chair Kehoe's point. I liken it a little bit now to how we get some direct input and engagement with the Chief Information Security Officer. That there's a measure of engagement and inclusion there. So I would just expect that to be similar in that regard. So it's a good suggestion.
That's a good analogy, actually. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Green.
So the internal audit division is still going to be the tip of the spear as far as identification. Nothing in this charter will hobble their ability to be independent and audit and follow under Searle what their responsibility is at LACERA.
That's correct. Their authority, role, responsibility is not diminished at all. Their role remains exactly as it is, with the addition of having the responsibility to, as they see fit in their work plan, review the compliance processes. And Mr. Bendel is here, and I'm sure he can certainly, he has read this charter and provided some input on it, his staff has, and you might want to get his input on that. But I can tell you categorically that there is no diminishment whatsoever in the role and authority of internal audit. It's critical.
Outstanding. And so then the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer is just another check valve in that observe, orientate, decide, act process. They're going to not necessarily be a town crier, but I'm curious about redundancy. I think that's really what I'm going with. But they're going to be like almost like a town crier, disseminating the information to all different areas, whether functional, administrative, or just advising. They're just another stopgap, correct? I mean,
they help management manage the organization and be aware of ethics and compliance risks and deal with them in the operations, the day-to-day operations of the business, without waiting for an audit to occur or without waiting for an incident of misconduct to occur. So that enhances management.
Okay, great. And that leads to my other thing. Other than the statistical value that, that's been demonstrated by having a ethics and compliance officer, is there anything that we're gaining as far as like a reduction in liability insurance for the organization by applying this? Is there?
I think the main gain is just the enhanced management as far as benefits on insurance. Rebecca might actually have some input on that.
Yeah, there are not sort of specific monetary benefits in terms of, for example, insurance premiums, but there are, in the event of misconduct occurring, if there is an investigation by regulators, by enforcement officials, the systems require or promise reductions in penalty if misconduct occurs. So, in some sense, it's a little bit of insurance against a higher criminal penalty, higher civil penalty. And there is also according to the data, significant decrease in the amount of misconduct that occurs, which means, hopefully, fewer lawsuits, fewer investigations, et cetera. The compliance team would be responsible for understanding the risks and creating systems and controls that then internal audit would periodically be testing.
Yeah, and just to add, I think from internal audit's perspective, it's hugely additive to the governance maturity of the organization. And we don't see them as infringing upon our independence or our ability, but it's collaborative in a sense, and we'll be able to place reliance on the work the compliance function is doing. So it just is rises all boats. I think it's definitely a huge benefit to the organization and very much a partner that we can replace reliance on as well, while we maintain our independence and ability to do our independent audit work as well. So,
Richard, do you see you reporting more issues to them, or them reporting more issues to you?
It'll be a two-way.
Completely independent?
It'll be a two-way discussion, I think. But as compliance identifies areas of concern, our risk assessment will definitely be talking to them and identifying where they're noticing issues, building that into an operational audit of that area if there are issues identified. But I think it also gives us comfort in areas. I mean, we do a certain amount of compliance testing right now that'll move towards more of the compliance side. We'll be able to rely on that and reduce our scope and focus elsewhere if that's what the results show. So it's beneficial for sure to internal audit and majorly to the organization.
Additional questions?
Next,
Thank you.
next slide, please. So this slide reviews the scope of the program activities that are included in the charter. This is a list of activities that is based on internal discussions and aligns with the needs of LACERA, but it also was developed with best practices in mind, and we believe this does correspond to best practices as set forth in the federal sentencing guidelines that Rebecca talked about. It includes all of the areas that the federal sentencing guidelines establish as expectations of being within compliance, as well as areas to correspond to LACERA's needs. And this is kind of a broad level outline within which the compliance program will work in preparing their own annual work plan, which will be approved by the CEO and by the audit committee, and if desired, also by the boards, although the charter does not currently provide for approval of the work plan by the boards, but it could be revised in that way. Next slide. As stated, we will present the plan for approval, so that there's monitoring in real time of what the compliance officer is up to, and that will be based on the ethics and compliance risk assessment that was already mentioned. We are looking into right now, educating ourselves about what an ethics and compliance risk assessment consists of. We're working with Rebecca. We will be working with Rebecca on that, and we also have other resources to educate ourselves about that, and we will be working on that even as we are in the final development stages of this program charter. We have built in multiple layers of accountability through reporting, through self-assessment, through external assessment, and through internal review from the CEO to the boards to the audit committee. The charter includes conflict of interest language to assure the program is conflict-free and addresses the scenarios where there might be a situation where the chief
ethics and compliance officer is in conflict with the chief legal counsel or with the chief executive officer, even, which is a foreseeable scenario because there can be misconduct anywhere in the organization. So the system needs to anticipate that, and in that event, the reporting would go directly to the chief, to the audit committee and the chair of the audit committee. Moving on to slide 25, the charter defines the role of the key governance positions. The audit committee we're proposing be renamed as the Audit, Compliance, Risk, and Ethics Committee. This is a title that was actually developed in conjunction with internal audit. In fact, I think Mr. Bendel actually conceived that name. And the idea is that to have a mature audit committee, it's not just simply looking at the audit function. It's looking at the compliance risk and having a responsibility for the compliance program. It's also dealing with enterprise risk management, which is something internal audit is taking the lead in developing. That's a management function that internal audit is spearheading. That is actually part of the same strategic goal. The strategic goal is actually compliance and enterprise risk management. There, Richard will be coming to, Mr. Bendel will be coming to the board, to the audit committee in the coming months on that subject. So that is the genesis of the renamed audit committee, which will have the oversight responsibility of the program. The boards will also receive reports, recommendations from the ACRE committee and directly from the chief ethics and compliance officer, which again is reinforcing something that the board today has emphasized is something that you want. The CEO will provide the functional oversight, and the chief counsel again is providing the administrative oversight and is a resource to particularly in the early days, but also on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. I will hand the baton over to Allison at this point to wrap up.
Good afternoon. It is afternoon. Afternoon, Mr. Chair and trustees. I have the honor of being the cleanup batter, so hopefully we can get these next two slides going and bring it all home. So the roles of managers, supervisors, and staff. The Ethics and Compliance Program is the responsibility of every individual at LACERA. Every manager and supervisor has a duty to promote a culture of ethics and compliance by communicating and modeling ethical standards and compliance with all laws, policies, and procedures, and most importantly, providing a space for all employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Equally, every staff member has a duty to perform their daily operations with the highest ethical standards, comply with all laws, policies, and procedures, and a duty to report any activity that falls below LACERA's standards. These duties are non-delegable, i.e. they are not an option, and part and parcel of every LACERA employee's fiduciary duty to our members. Next slide, please. As we've discussed a little bit earlier, our next steps, because this program is fundamental to the entire organization, we have proposed this inclusive path through board governance. So we started with the OOC, and we are hoping that the program charter will travel for review from the Board of Retirement to the JOGC, to the joint boards, and finally to the ACRE committee for approval, while incorporating committee and board input along each step of the way. Once the Ethics and Compliance Program Charter is approved, the ACRE Committee Charter will be updated to integrate the Ethics and Compliance Program Charter and to enhance the ACRE Committee's compliance and oversight role. Meanwhile, staff will also prepare the job description for the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. Then the CECO job description and the ACRE Committee Charter will be referred to the joint boards for final approval. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, the Ethics and Compliance Committee will continue to meet monthly to support the development and then ultimately the operation of the Ethics and Compliance Program. So all of the above, we're hoping will culminate with the initial implementation of LACERA's Ethics and Compliance Program by June 30th, 2024. That's our goal. With that, if there are any further questions or discussions, we are ready.
I would just say on the previous slide with the roles of managers, supervisors, and staff, we should include a function, when you're talking about the charter, have a function that talks about what the executives' role are and also the board's role. So boards, executives, managers, supervisors, and staff, and what all their functions are when we're looking at the charter. And then just so that everybody had wrapped around this, you're going to take all of our comments, put together a charter finalized. I'm sure it's pretty much well polished at this point. You're going to polish it off, send it to the JOG-C. JOG-C is going to review it, discuss it, and send it off to respective boards for approval.
Yes.
And then once approved, then we're going to direct the audit committee's changes of name and also their charter.
Yes.
Perfect. Any questions? Seeing none, I appreciate the presentation and everybody sticking through it. So we're going to go ahead and continue on with our agenda. Item D through G are all informational only items. Is there any members of the board that would like to pull and discuss any of these? Seeing none, we're moving on to the items for staff review.
I have one item. Trustee Kehoe requested for staff to provide the board with additional information regarding LACERA's membership regarding the outside districts.
Thank you. Any additional items for staff review? Hearing none, we're going to move on to items for future agenda. Any request to have items added to future agendas for discussions? I see none. We'll move on to the good of the order, and Bonnie, you can take us around the horn.
Sure. Mr. Razzo? Sure,
Yeah.
Mr. Knox. Come back to you.
This is the opportunity where we can just chime in anything.
Yeah, Mr.
And I just want to wish everybody a happy new year. I want to welcome our new trustees, our returning trustees, and congratulate those that are going to be in the leadership capacity this year. Looking forward to a good year. Thank you.
Mr. Green?
Thank you. Yes, echo the Happy New Year. Looking forward to the new year. We got a big change, and yeah, I'm glad to be here in person. I had that crud that lasted about 5 weeks, and welcome to the new trustees. And thanks for the work by staff and everybody at the first part of the holiday season and leading up to the first part of the year, putting this stuff together. It's a lot over with trying to spend time with the family. So thanks for that. That's it.
Mr. Harris?
I echo everyone's comments.
Mr. Robbins? Nothing? Mr. Rue?
Happy New Year, everyone, and I'm glad to be on the BOR and look forward to learning from all of you. A lot of good friends already on the board and old acquaintances, so it's good to see everyone and new acquaintances and new friends. So, and I look forward to the service here.
Ms. Gray?
Happy New Year, everyone. I'm really excited about this year. It's a decision-making year for me, but I want to welcome back Mr. Moore and welcome Mr. Rue and definitely welcome Mr. Razzo. It'll get better, trust me, okay? And we'll try and make sure that you don't get picked on right away, at least for this meeting. And I just want to say that I'm really happy with the progressive work that we are doing to make this organization run tightly and smoothly. Mr. Kryman, you're doing a great job along with your staff of, I always call them your C-suite, but they're doing well. It seems like you're going to have a lot on your plate throughout this year, at least for the next 6 months, so that if the board can assist in any way, just call us. Somebody will say, yeah, let's do that at the next meeting, or let's call a special meeting. But basically, I see that our work is already cut out for this year, and it's only January. So welcome, everybody, and get ready for the ride. Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
Happy New Year to everyone, and glad to be back sitting on the horseshoe and watching what's going on and making whatever contribution I can make to the success of this organization. I was thinking earlier that I was on the selection committee that brought Mr. Santos Kryman here, and he's just been doing a fantastic job in moving this organization into a highly professional group of people that we suspected and we wanted to see happen. So I'm glad to be here.
Mr. Sanchez?
Same for me. Happy New Year. Thank you, everybody, for putting this together. I just want to highlight it's exciting to see that we're going to continue to work with the recruitment firm. Really important to continue to fill these positions as carefully and as soon as possible. So thank you for that update. I am still on vacation, so I'm in my office on Friday. So I'm going to leave a little early today. So I have to apologize for that, but I have to pick up my girls from soccer camp. And I hope everybody got some time off as well, too. It's important to do before this tough year. So thank you all for your work.
Mr. Oakham?
Yeah, just Happy New Year. Let's have a good year. And Vivian, you can scare us with some of your comments. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Moore back and our new trustees. It's going to be a pleasure working with you.
Mr. Razzo?
Okay, now I'm ready. Happy New Year, everyone. It's an honor to be on this board. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. Everyone has been very, very welcoming, and I definitely appreciate that. Although today I was a little quiet because it's my first time here, I do have, my opinions and questions and everything. So, that's coming in the future. But as for now, I'm just, learning a lot, and I'm very appreciative for everyone.
Mr. Kryman?
So I just want to welcome all the new trustees and Mr. Moore, thank you for the kind remarks, and Ms. Gray, thank you for the kind remarks. All the credit really goes to my staff. They've been incredible over the last 4 years. And I can just tell you that we do have a lot to do, but we're very enthusiastic about the direction of the organization, the leadership that you provided, the support that you all provided. None of that could have happened without you and the staff looking to make sure that we implement the vision of this particular organization and this particular board. So with that, thank you. And I wish everybody a happy new year, and soccer practice is, I'm just happy I don't have to do that anymore, to be honest with you. But I do miss it. But I just wanted to wish my staff a very happy new year, and look forward to working with all of you to make sure that we're, making LACERA the best possible in the upcoming years. All right, thank you.
Mr. Rice, you have a verbal update regarding executive session.
Yes, under the Brown Act and for the record, we'll state that executive session item 18B relates to the employment claim of Charlotte Nakla.
Okay, and just to reiterate, executive session, there is an item, just because of the mic.
Steve, can you come up to the mic and just repeat it, just so that Mr. Robbins and the rest of the world can hear you?
Yes, my announcement was under the Brown Act and for the record, executive session item 18B relates to the employment claim of Charlotte Nakla. Thanks for making sure that was clear.
Thank you so much. And Chair Kehoe.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's trust again for this year, and congratulations to all the other officers, and welcome to all the trustees. It's going to be a great year. I know it is. And please send over your committee assignments to Bonnie. I know she sent out an email, so please make your requests, and I encourage new trustees to ask for everything just so that you get an opportunity to get out there, and then I'll do my best to accommodate everybody as much as I can. Thank you. And I think now we move along to our disability cases in closed session, so we will go into closed session. Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break to 12:35. Is that okay for everybody? 12:35.
Recording stopped.